a bride thrown into servant quarters on her wedding night. They said Duke Rowan Blackmore was cursed, a monster who'd let his first wife die in madness and grief. When Elena Ward's father gambled away their estate, she became the price, sold to the reclusive Duke in a marriage that felt more like a funeral. But nothing prepared her for what waited at Blackmore Manor. Not a bridal suite, but a cold servant's room. Not a husband, but a ghost of a man who couldn't even look at her. The frontier had broken stronger people than her. But Elena Ward wasn't planning to break. Stay until the end to see how she survives. Drop a comment with your city below and smash that like button. The carriage lurched over another rut in the road, and Elena's head knocked against the wooden frame hard enough to make her teeth click together. She didn't bother steadying herself anymore. What was the point? Everything worth holding on to had already been ripped away. "You'll be grateful for this one day," her father had said, signing the marriage contract with hands that shook from drink more than emotion. "The Duke is wealthy, titled. You'll want for nothing. Nothing except choice. Nothing except dignity. Nothing except a husband who'd actually wanted her." The landscape outside had grown steadily bleaker over the past 2 days of travel. The rolling green hills near her family's former estate, she corrected herself bitterly, had given way to rocky moorland that stretched endlessly beneath a sky the color of old bruises. Wind battered the carriage, whistling through gaps in the window frame, carrying the smell of rain and something else, something cold and final. Blackmore territory. The edge of civilization, people said, where the frontier began and comfort ended. Elena pulled her traveling cloak tighter, though it did nothing against the chill settling into her bones. 23 years old, and she was being shipped off like cargo to a man she'd never met. A man whose reputation preceded him like a funeral procession. "Careful with that one," the dressmaker had whispered while fitting Elena's wedding gown, a hastily altered hand-me-down that smelled of mothballs and crushed dreams. "They say Duke Blackmore's first wife went mad, locked herself in the tower and wouldn't eat. When they finally broke down the door, she was—" "That's enough," Elena's mother had snapped, though her face had gone pale. But the damage was done. Elena had heard the rest from the household staff, traded in whispers like currency. The first Duchess had wasted away to nothing. Some said grief, others said the Duke's cruelty. All agreed she'd died alone, and that Rowan Blackmore hadn't been the same since. "Cursed," the stable boy had muttered, crossing himself when he thought no one was looking. Now, as the carriage crested a hill and Blackmore Manor came into view, Elena understood why people believed in curses. The estate sprawled across the moorland like something dying. Gray stone walls rose from the earth, severe and unwelcoming, with towers that looked more like prison keeps than noble architecture. No gardens softened the approach. No flowering trees or manicured hedges. Just wild grass bent sideways by relentless wind, and the manor itself hulking against the horizon like a judge, waiting to pass sentence. "Jesus," the driver muttered, and Elena couldn't even find it in herself to be shocked by the blasphemy. The carriage rolled to a stop in a courtyard that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years. Weeds pushed through cracks in the cobblestones. The fountain at the center stood dry, its basin filled with dead leaves and the bones of some small animal. Elena waited for someone to open the carriage door. No one came. She could hear voices, low, urgent, just outside. The driver arguing with someone. After a long moment, she pushed the door open herself and climbed down, her travel-stiff legs nearly buckling. The man arguing with her driver was tall and weathered, with iron-gray hair and the kind of face that had forgotten how to smile. He wore the crisp uniform of a butler, but his expression held none of the deference she'd expected. "I don't care what arrangements were made," he was saying. "The Duke gave no orders about—" He broke off when he saw Elena, and something almost like pity flickered across his features before his face went carefully blank. "Miss Ward." "Mrs. Blackmore," Elena corrected quietly. The marriage had been performed by proxy 3 days ago. Legal, binding, and utterly devoid of ceremony. She was a wife in name, if nothing else. The butler's jaw tightened. "Of course. I'm Graves, the head of household. If you'll follow me." He didn't offer to help with her trunk. The driver hauled it down himself, looking increasingly nervous, then climbed back onto his seat with unseemly haste. Wait, Elena called, but the carriage was already moving, wheels clattering over broken stone as it fled back down the hill. Abandoned her, just like everyone else. She turned to find Graves already walking toward a side entrance. Not the grand front doors, she noticed, but a small wooden door that looked like it led to the service areas. Is the Duke? She started. His Grace is not receiving visitors today. I'm not a visitor. I'm his wife. Graves stopped walking but didn't turn around. You're a complication he didn't ask for. The words hit like a slap. Elena had expected coldness, perhaps even hostility, but this casual dismissal was something else entirely. She'd been married to a stranger to save her family from financial ruin, shipped across 2 days of hostile country to the edge of nowhere, and now she was being told she wasn't even expected? My father signed a contract, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. The Duke agreed to this marriage. His solicitor agreed. His Grace was not consulted. Graves finally turned to face her, and his expression was harder than the stone walls surrounding them. You need to understand something, Mrs. Blackmore. This manor is not a home. It has not been a home for 5 years. It's a tomb, and His Grace prefers it that way. Your presence here is not welcome. It is not wanted, and it will change nothing. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. Then what am I supposed to do? Survive, if you can. He gestured toward the door. Your quarters are in the east wing. You'll take meals with the staff. Do not wander the main halls after dark. Do not attempt to see His Grace. Do not disturb the household routine. Is that clear? My quarters, Elena repeated slowly. You mean the Duchess's chambers. Those rooms remain closed. You'll be given suitable accommodation elsewhere. A servant's room. Better than you'll get if you make trouble. Graves's tone was final. Now, if you'll follow me, the housekeeper will show you what you need to know. Elena stood in the dying afternoon light, the wind cutting through her cloak, and understood with sudden, terrible clarity what kind of marriage she'd entered. This wasn't exile from her old life. It was exile into nowhere. She wasn't a bride or even a wife. She was an unwanted obligation, shoved into the servants' quarters of a house that felt more like a mausoleum than a manor. For a moment, just a moment, she considered demanding her rights, insisting on proper quarters, proper treatment, proper recognition. She was a ward, daughter of a minor but respectable family. She had been educated, raised to eventually manage a household. She deserved better than this. But the truth was bitter and unavoidable. Her father had sold her to clear his debts, and the man who'd bought her wanted nothing to do with his purchase. So Elena did the only thing she could do. She picked up her trunk, heavy and awkward in her hands, and followed Graves through the servants' door. The corridors inside were narrow and dim, lit by smoky oil lamps that cast more shadow than light. The walls were bare stone, cold enough that Elena could see her breath. They passed a few servants who quickly looked away, as if her very presence was something shameful to witness. Graves led her up a cramped staircase to the 3rd floor, down another corridor that smelled of damp and old cooking grease, and finally stopped at a door that looked like all the others. This is yours. He pushed it open without ceremony. The room was small. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single chair, and a window so grimy she could barely see through it. It was clean enough, she supposed, but utterly cheerless. The kind of room meant for a scullery maid, not a duke's wife. Mrs. Hartwell will come by within the hour to explain your duties, Graves said. Duties? You'll earn your keep like everyone else. His Grace doesn't support idle hands. He set her trunk inside the door with a thud. Dinner's at 6 in the servants' hall. Don't be late. He left without another word, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Elena stood alone in her new prison, listening to the wind howl against the walls, and felt something dangerous kindle in her chest. Not despair. She'd been acquainted with despair for weeks now, ever since her father had broken the news of her arranged marriage. This was something sharper, something that tasted like defiance. They expected her to disappear, to become invisible, to accept this humiliation and fade into the background of a household that wanted nothing to do with her. But Elena Blackmore, she corrected herself with bitter emphasis, had survived a gambling addict father and a mother too weak to stand up to him. She'd survived years of watching her family's fortune crumble piece by piece. She'd survived being sold like livestock to a stranger. She could survive this too, even if survival meant living among servants in her own husband's house, even if it meant being treated like a ghost in a place that was supposedly her home. Elena unpacked her few belongings with methodical precision, refusing to let her hands shake. She had 3 dresses, 2 nightgowns, a hairbrush with half its bristles missing, and a small leather journal her mother had pressed into her hands at the last moment. "Write to us," her mother had whispered, though they both knew Elena wouldn't. There was nothing to say to the people who'd sacrificed her for their own survival. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened before she could respond, and a woman stepped inside. Middle-aged, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and a face that suggested she'd never smiled in her life. "I'm Mrs. Hartwell, the housekeeper." Her gaze swept over Elena with the efficiency of long practice, cataloging and dismissing in one motion. "You'll rise at 5:30, help in the kitchen until breakfast is served, then assist with laundry and mending. Afternoons you'll help wherever you're needed. Evenings, the same. Understood?" "I'm the Duke's wife," Elena said quietly. "You're another mouth to feed in a household that's barely holding together." Mrs. Hartwell's tone was blunt, not cruel, but matter-of-fact. "His Grace doesn't see anyone, doesn't leave his rooms except at night when he thinks no one's watching. He doesn't care that you're here, and frankly, neither do I. You want to eat, you work. That's how it goes." "Does he know I've arrived?" "I imagine Graves told him. Whether he listened is another matter entirely." The housekeeper moved to the window and adjusted the thin curtain with brisk efficiency. "Listen, girl, I don't know what you expected coming here, but this manor isn't like other noble houses. There are no balls, no dinners, no social calls. The Duke has been unwell since his first wife died. The staff that remain do so out of loyalty or lack of better options. We keep the place running because that's what we do, but don't expect warmth. Don't expect welcome. And for God's sake, don't expect to see your husband." Elena absorbed this with the same numb acceptance she'd been cultivating for weeks. "What happened to her? The first Duchess?" Mrs. Hartwell's expression went carefully neutral. "That's not something we discuss. I have a right to know what happened in this house." "You have a right to nothing here." The housekeeper moved toward the door. "Dinner is in an hour. Don't be late, and don't ask questions the staff won't answer. You'll only make things harder for yourself." She left, and Elena was alone again with the sound of wind and the weight of everything she'd lost pressing down on her shoulders. She moved to the grimy window and rubbed a circle clear with her sleeve. Below, the moorland stretched endlessly, dark and wild beneath a sky that promised rain. Somewhere in this manor, the man she'd married sight unseen was hiding in his rooms, unwilling or unable to face her, a ghost of a husband in a tomb of a house. Elena pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried to remember what hope felt like. Dinner in the servants' hall was a grim affair. The room was warmer than the rest of the manor at least, heated by the kitchen fires on the other side of the wall. A long wooden table dominated the space, scarred and stained from years of use. The dozen or so servants who remained at Blackmore Manor sat in practiced positions, leaving a gap at the end where Elena awkwardly took a seat. No one spoke to her. A few glanced her way with expressions ranging from curiosity to resentment, but most simply ignored her presence as they ate their stew, thin and underseasoned, more turnips than meat. Elena forced herself to eat anyway. She'd learned during the lean years at home not to waste food, no matter how unappetizing. "That's her, then," someone muttered from further down the table. "The new Duchess." "She won't last," another voice replied. "They never do." Elena kept her eyes on her bowl, but her ears were sharp. What happened to the last one who tried to help? This from a younger voice, nervous. "Fired within a week. His Grace doesn't want help. Doesn't want anything except to be left alone." Mrs. Hartwell's voice cut through the whispers like a knife. "That's enough. Eat your dinner and mind your business." Silence fell, uncomfortable and heavy. Elena finished her stew and rose to clear her bowl, following the other servants to a washing station where she scrubbed her dishes clean. No one offered to show her where things went. She had to watch and copy, feeling the weight of hostile or indifferent stares on her back. When she finally made her way back to her small room, the sky outside had gone fully dark. The corridor was even dimmer than before, the oil lamps burning low to save fuel. Elena's footsteps echoed on the bare stone, and somewhere in the distance she heard something else, a sound like furniture being overturned. A man's voice, raw and anguished, though the words were impossible to make out. She froze, her hand on her door handle. Another crash, closer this time. Then silence, sudden and complete. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to go into her room, close the door, and pretend she'd heard nothing. That's what the servants did clearly. That's what she was expected to do. But she'd spent her whole life being expected to stay quiet, stay small, stay out of the way. And where had that gotten her? Instead, she moved toward the sound, her steps soft on the stone floor. The corridor branched ahead, one path leading deeper into the servants' wing, the other toward what she assumed were the main residential areas. The crashing had come from the second direction. Elena turned that way, her pulse loud in her ears. The architecture changed as she walked. The bare stone giving way to plastered walls, the narrow corridor opening into something wider and more formal. This was clearly the part of the manor meant for the Duke's family, though it felt just as abandoned as the servants' quarters. Dust coated every surface. The portraits on the walls were faded and water-stained. Another sound ahead, not a crash this time, but something worse. A man's voice, breaking on words that might have been a name. Elena stopped in front of a door that stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling through the gap. She should turn back. She knew she should turn back, but her hand was already pushing the door open before her mind could catch up. The room beyond was a study, or had been once. Now it looked like a battlefield. Books lay scattered across the floor, some torn, others simply hurled aside. A desk chair was overturned. Papers covered every surface, many of them marked with what looked like the same handwriting, over and over. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." And in the center of the destruction sat a man. He was on his knees, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking with tremors that might have been sobs or something more violent. Dark hair fell across his face, tangled and unkempt. He wore a fine shirt that had clearly once been white, but was now stained and wrinkled, half untucked from trousers that looked like they hadn't been changed in days. This was the Duke, her husband, the monster of Blackmore Manor. He looked like someone being torn apart from the inside out. "Your Grace?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. His head snapped up, and for the first time she saw Rowan Blackmore's face. He would have been handsome once, she thought distantly. Strong features, sharp cheekbones, eyes that might have been striking if they weren't currently red-rimmed and wild. But it was the expression that stopped her breath. Not anger, not cruelty. Raw, unfiltered anguish. The look of a man who'd been screaming into the void for so long he'd forgotten any other way to exist. "Get out!" His voice was hoarse, wrecked. "Get out! Get out! Get out!" Elena should have listened. Every survival instinct she possessed told her to back away slowly and never speak of this again. Instead, she heard herself say, "No." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, buried under layers of pain. "You don't belong here." "Neither do you, apparently." She looked around at the destroyed study. "What are you doing? What does it look like?" He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I'm going mad, just like she did. Seems fitting, doesn't it? Poetic justice." "Who?" Though Elena suspected she already knew. "My wife." He said it like a curse. "My first wife, the one I killed." "You didn't—" "Don't." The word cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare tell me what I did or didn't do. You don't know anything about me, about this place, about what happened here." He was right, of course. She knew nothing except rumors and ghost stories, but she knew what self-destruction looked like. She'd watched her father drink himself into oblivion night after night, drowning in guilt over debts he couldn't pay. She recognized the particular kind of agony that came from blaming yourself for things you couldn't change. "You're right," Elena said quietly. "I don't know you, but I know what it looks like when someone's trying to punish themselves to death." Rowan's laugh was bitter. "Is that what you think this is? Punishment?" He gestured at the chaos around him. "This is existence. This is every day. This is the price for surviving when someone else didn't. That's not—" "She died in this house." His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, more dangerous for its quietness. She wasted away to nothing because I couldn't save her, couldn't reach her, couldn't even understand what was happening until it was too late. And now I'm trapped in the same walls where she suffered, haunted by every room she walked through, every corner where her ghost still lingers. So don't tell me about punishment, girl. This entire manor is my punishment, and I deserve every second of it. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with years of accumulated grief. Elena should have been frightened. She should have been running back to her little room, locking the door, and staying as far away from this broken man as possible. But all she could think was how familiar that kind of pain was, how well she knew the weight of guilt that logic couldn't touch. They put me in the servants' quarters, she said, apropos of nothing. Rowan blinked, the non sequitur catching him off guard. What? When I arrived today. They gave me a room in the servants' wing and told me I'd be working for my keep. Your butler, Graves. He made it very clear that I'm not welcome here, that you don't want a wife, don't want my presence, don't want anything to do with me. She met his eyes directly. He wasn't wrong, was he? Something in Rowan's expression shifted. Not softening, nothing about him was soft, but changing. I didn't ask for you to be sent here. I didn't ask to be sent either, but here we are. Elena looked around the destroyed study again. I can leave if you want, go back to my room, pretend I never saw this. Pretend I never saw you. That seems to be what everyone in this house prefers anyway. Pretending. Pretending everything's fine, pretending you don't exist, pretending the past didn't happen. It's easier that way. For who? You? She shook her head. You're destroying yourself in here, and everyone's just letting it happen. That's not mercy. That's cowardice. For a long moment, Rowan just stared at her, and Elena braced herself for rage, for violence, for whatever explosion came when you poked at a wounded animal. Instead, he said quietly, "You should go." Not a threat. A plea. Elena turned toward the door, then stopped. I'm in the East Wing, 3rd floor. If you need... She didn't know how to finish that sentence. If you need help? He'd made it clear he didn't want help. If you need someone? He had a whole staff that kept their distance for good reason. If you need to not be alone, she finally said, I'm there. She left before he could respond, before she could second-guess the impulsive offer, before the reality of what she'd just walked into could fully sink in. Behind her, she heard no response, no acknowledgement, just silence, which somehow felt louder than all the crashes and broken words that had come before. Elena made her way back through the dark corridors, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. She'd just confronted the Duke of Blackmore in his private study. She'd seen him at his lowest, most vulnerable. She'd offered comfort to a man who clearly wanted nothing but to be left alone with his demons. She'd broken every rule she'd been given on her first day here. And strangest of all, she didn't regret it. Back in her small room, Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed and tried to process everything she'd seen. The broken man in the study bore no resemblance to the monster of the rumors. He wasn't cruel or heartless. He was gutted, hollowed out by grief and guilt until there was almost nothing left. The first Duchess hadn't died because Rowan Blackmore was a monster. She'd died, and it had made him one. Or at least it had made him into whatever this was, a man too broken to live but too stubborn to die, locked in a manner that felt more like a prison with every passing hour. Elena understood prisons. She'd been raised in one, in a different way, a house slowly crumbling around them while her father gambled away everything they had, while her mother pretended not to notice, while Elena herself learned to make herself small and quiet and unobtrusive so as not to be another burden. She'd thought marriage would be an escape. Even an arranged marriage to a stranger had seemed preferable to watching her family's slow-motion collapse. She'd been wrong, of course. This was an escape. This was a different kind of prison, just as suffocating, just as hopeless. Except she'd looked into Rowan Blackmore's eyes tonight and seen something she recognized. Not a monster, just a man who'd convinced himself he deserved to suffer. And Elena had spent enough years watching people destroy themselves to know how that story ended if no one intervened. She lay back on her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside and the manor creak around her like a living thing. Tomorrow she would wake at 5:30 and work in the kitchen. She would pretend to be just another servant. She would keep her head down and follow the rules. But tonight, she'd broken those rules. She'd walked into the Duke's private hell and offered him something no one else in this house seemed willing to give. Simple human presence, without judgment, without fear. She had no idea if he would take her up on it. Probably not. Probably he'd go back to destroying himself in private while the household looked the other way. But the offer stood. And for the first time since arriving at Blackmore Manor, Elena felt something other than despair settling into her bones. It wasn't hope, exactly. Hope seemed too bright a word for this dark place, but it was something, a tiny ember of purpose in the cold. She'd survived this place. Somehow. And maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't be the only one. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain lashing against the windows with violent force. Thunder rolled across the moors, and in the distance, Elena thought she heard another crash from somewhere deeper in the manor. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing tomorrow would bring more of the same. Cold rooms, hostile stares, and the suffocating weight of a house haunted by ghosts, both living and dead. But tonight, for just a moment, she'd seen past the ghost to the man beneath. And that changed everything. The kitchen work started before dawn, just as Mrs. Hartwell had promised. Elena's hands were raw within the first hour, scrubbing pots that had been left to soak overnight, their insides crusted with yesterday's meals. The cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Agnes, who spoke only in grunts and sharp gestures, showed her once how to do each task and expected perfection after that. When Elena fumbled a stack of plates, Agnes's glare could have frozen water. "Clumsy," one of the younger maids muttered, loud enough to be heard. "Can't even handle dishes. What good is a lady who can't do honest work?" Elena bit her tongue and kept scrubbing. Her back ached. Her shoulders burned. But she'd be damned if she'd give them the satisfaction of seeing her quit. The servants' hall at breakfast was no warmer than dinner had been. Elena ate her porridge, lumpy and undersweetened, while conversations flowed around her as if she didn't exist. They talked about supply shortages, about the roof leak in the west wing that no one had bothered to fix, about how the butcher in the village was charging too much for mutton. No one mentioned the Duke. It was like he was a secret the whole house kept, a wound they'd all agreed not to touch. Elena finished her breakfast and reported to the laundry room, where mountains of linens waited. The work was backbreaking, hauling water, scrubbing stains, wringing out heavy sheets until her arms trembled. The other women worked around her and practiced rhythm, never offering help, never speaking except to point out when she'd done something wrong. "You're making more work than you're worth," Mrs. Hartwell said when she came by for inspection. "At this rate, we'd be better off without you." "I'm learning," Elena said through gritted teeth. "Learning won't keep you fed if you can't pull your weight." The housekeeper's expression was carved from stone. "His Grace doesn't keep useless things around." That stung worse than the raw skin on Elena's palms. She wanted to throw it back in the woman's face, wanted to say that apparently the Duke kept plenty of useless things around, starting with a manor full of servants who enabled his self-destruction. But that would only make things worse. So she nodded and went back to scrubbing. The days blurred together after that. Wake before dawn, work until her body screamed for rest, collapse into bed, only to do it all again the next morning. The servants remained hostile or indifferent, treating her like an interloper who'd invaded their space. Meals were eaten in silence. Her small room felt more like a cell with each passing night. And through it all, Elena heard the crashes. They came at irregular intervals, always after dark. Sometimes it was the sound of furniture being overturned, sometimes breaking glass. Once she heard what sounded like someone putting their fist through a wall. The other servants never reacted, never even looked up from whatever they were doing. It was just another part of the manor's nightly routine. The Duke destroying himself in private while everyone pretended not to notice. Elena lasted 3 days before her resolve cracked. It was past midnight when she heard it this time. Not a crash, but worse. A man's voice, hoarse and broken, saying the same words over and over. I'm sorry. I couldn't save you. I'm sorry." She was out of bed before she'd fully decided to move, her bare feet silent on the cold stone floor. The corridors were dark except for the dying embers of a few lamps, shadows pooling in corners like spilled ink. The sound led her to the same study as before, though the door was closed this time. She could hear him through the wood, not the violent destruction of her first night, but something quieter and somehow worse. The sound of a man coming apart at the seams. Elena raised her hand to knock, then stopped. What was she doing? He told her to leave last time, made it clear he wanted nothing from her. She had no right to intrude on his private hell, no matter what her instincts were screaming. But her hand knocked anyway, 3 soft taps that seemed impossibly loud in the silent corridor. The sounds inside stopped abruptly. "Go away!" Rowan's voice was rough, like he'd been screaming. "Whoever you are, go away." It's Elena. She didn't know why she used her first name instead of some formal title. "Your wife." Silence. Then, "I don't have a wife." The lawyers would disagree. The lawyers can go to hell. But there was less venom in it than before, just exhaustion. "What do you want?" Elena didn't have an answer to that. What did she want? To help? He didn't want help. To offer comfort? He'd made it clear comfort was the last thing he deserved. "I could hear you from my room," she said finally. "The whole house can probably hear you. I thought—" She stopped, unsure how to finish. The door opened so suddenly she nearly fell forward. Rowan stood in the doorway, backlit by lamplight, and he looked worse than the first time she'd seen him. His shirt was torn at the shoulder. There was a fresh bruise blooming along his jaw. His eyes were wild, desperate, barely holding on to something that might have been sanity. "You thought what?" he demanded. "That you'd swoop in and fix me? That you'd be different from all the others who tried? That your presence would somehow make this bearable?" "No," Elena said quietly. "I thought you might want someone to sit with you, that's all." That seemed to catch him off guard. Some of the fight went out of his posture, replaced by something that looked almost like confusion. "Sit with me," he repeated, like the words didn't make sense. "You don't have to talk. You don't have to explain anything. I'll just—" She shrugged. "Be there. So you're not alone. I deserve to be alone." "Maybe, but you don't have to be." Rowan stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him wrestling with something. Pride, maybe, or the desire to keep punishing himself. Then his shoulders sagged slightly, and he stepped back from the door. "5 minutes," he said. "Then you leave." Elena slipped inside before he could change his mind. The study looked marginally better than it had 3 nights ago. Someone had picked up the scattered books and righted the furniture, though the papers covered in apologies still littered every surface. Rowan moved to a chair by the window and collapsed into it like a puppet with cut strings. Elena took the other chair, keeping a careful distance between them. True to her word, she didn't speak, just sat there while the lamplight flickered and the wind howled outside and Rowan's breathing gradually steadied from ragged gasps to something more controlled. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Finally, Rowan spoke. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" "Should I be?" "Everyone else is." He gestured vaguely toward the door. "The servants whisper about me like I'm some kind of monster. They avoid the residential wings after dark. They do their work and pretend I don't exist because it's easier than facing what I've become." "What have you become?" He laughed bitterly. "A cautionary tale. A warning about what happens when you fail the people you love." "You're a man in pain," Elena said. "That's not the same as being a monster." "You don't know what I did." "Then tell me." The words hung between them, a challenge and an invitation. Rowan's jaw worked like he was chewing on something sharp. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Her name was Catherine. We married young, too young, probably. I was barely 22, still trying to figure out how to run this estate after my father died. She was 19, beautiful, full of life." He stopped, and Elena could see the effort it took to continue. "The first year was good. Hard, but good. We were building something together. Then the second year, something changed. She started withdrawing, stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping. I thought it was just the isolation getting to her. This place isn't exactly welcoming." Elena thought of the bleak moorland, the cold stone walls, the endless wind. "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." "I tried to help, Brought in doctors, brought in friends from the city to keep her company. Nothing worked. She just kept fading, like she was disappearing from the inside out. And his voice cracked. I didn't understand. Couldn't understand what was happening to her. I thought if I just tried harder, loved her better, gave her everything she needed, she'd come back to me. But she didn't. She locked herself in the tower room, refused to eat, refused to see anyone. By the time we broke down the door, he stopped, unable to continue. Elena waited, her heart aching for the man sitting across from her, drowning in guilt for something he probably couldn't have prevented. She was still alive when we found her, Rowan finally continued. Barely. So thin I could count every bone in her body. She looked at me like she didn't even know who I was, died 3 days later, and the whole time, all I could think was that I should have done something different, should have seen it sooner, should have saved her. That's not how it works, Elena said gently. You can't save someone from their own mind. I should have tried harder. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough because it was never going to be enough. Some things... She stopped, thinking of her father's gambling, her mother's willful blindness. Some things are beyond our control, no matter how much we wish otherwise. Rowan's laugh was broken. You sound like you know something about that. I know what it's like to watch someone destroy themselves while you stand by helpless. Elena looked down at her hands, raw and reddened from days of kitchen work. I know what it's like to blame yourself for not fixing something that was never yours to fix. They sat in silence after that, two people who understood different flavors of the same bitter medicine. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. Finally, Rowan said, You should go. It's late. Elena stood, but at the door she paused. Tomorrow night. If you need, I'll be here. Same time. Don't. The word was sharp. Don't make this a habit. Don't try to save me. I'm not trying to save you, Elena said honestly. I'm just offering to sit with you. There's a difference. She left before he could argue, making her way back through the dark corridors to her small room. Her heart was racing, though she couldn't quite say why. She'd just spent half an hour with the Duke of Blackmore, listening to him confess his deepest guilt, and instead of fear, all she felt was a strange kinship. They were both prisoners here, both trapped by circumstances beyond their control, both trying to survive in a house that felt more like a tomb every day. The difference was that Rowan had given up on surviving. He was just going through the motions, destroying himself slowly because he thought that's what he deserved. And Elena was tired of watching people destroy themselves. The next day's work was just as brutal as before. Agnes set her to plucking chickens, a disgusting task that left her covered in feathers and blood. The other servants snickered when she gagged at the smell, and no one offered advice when she struggled to find the right angle for pulling quills. Useless, someone muttered. Absolutely useless. At lunch, Mrs. Hartwell announced that Elena would be reassigned to chamber pot duty, the lowest, most degrading job in the household hierarchy. Since you can't handle kitchen work, the housekeeper said with cold satisfaction, perhaps you're better suited to cleaning up after others. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, humiliation burning through her chest. This was punishment, pure and simple. Punishment for being there at all, for disrupting their comfortable routine, for existing in a space where she wasn't wanted. But she nodded and took her new assignment without complaint. What else could she do? That evening, as she emptied chamber pots into the waste barrels behind the manor, she overheard two stable hands talking. Duke's getting worse, one said. Tom says he heard him last night, screaming about blood and broken promises. Says it sounded like demons had taken him. More like he's taken himself, the other replied. Man's been half mad since the first Duchess died. This new one won't last any longer than the others who tried to help. What others? A couple years back, his cousin sent a physician. Duke threw him out within a week. Then last year, some priest came by, thought he could offer spiritual guidance or some such. Duke nearly put his fist through the man's face. Elena's hand stilled on the barrel. She hadn't known about others who'd tried to reach Rowan, hadn't known he'd violently rejected every attempt at help. This new wife's a fool if she thinks she's different, the first stable hand said. Best thing she could do is keep her head down and stay out of his way. Elena finished her work in silence, those words echoing in her head. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was a fool for thinking she could make any difference here. Maybe the smart thing would be to accept her exile, do her work, and stop trying to reach a man who clearly didn't want to be reached. But that night, when she heard the familiar sounds of destruction from the residential wing, she found herself walking toward them anyway. This time, the door to the study was already open. Rowan sat at his desk, a bottle of whiskey at his elbow, staring at a portrait on the wall that Elena hadn't noticed before. A young woman with dark hair and sad eyes looked out from the frame. Catherine, Elena realized. The first Duchess. "I told you not to make this a habit," Rowan said without turning around. "I don't take orders well." Elena stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "Comes from growing up with a father who gave too many of them." That got a bitter smile from him. "We're quite a pair, aren't we? The broken duke and the unwanted wife." "I prefer survivors," Elena said, taking the same chair as the night before. "It sounds less pathetic." Rowan actually laughed, short and harsh, but genuine. "Survivors. Is that what we're doing? Surviving? What else would you call it?" "Existing. Barely." He gestured at the portrait. "She haunts me, you know. Every room in this house, every corridor. I see her everywhere, wasting away, and I can't—" His hand clenched around the whiskey bottle. "I can't escape it." "Have you tried?" "Tried what?" "Escaping. Leaving this place." Elena looked around the study, at the papers covered in apologies, at the visible signs of 5 years' worth of self-inflicted punishment. "This manor is your prison. Why stay?" "Because I deserve to be here." Rowan's voice was flat, final. "I deserve to live with what I did." "You didn't do anything except fail to perform a miracle." Elena leaned forward, something fierce kindling in her chest. "You couldn't save her. That doesn't make you a murderer. It makes you human." "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Her voice was sharper than she'd intended. "I understand what it's like to watch someone you love spiral down and feel powerless to stop it. I understand the guilt that comes after, the voice in your head that says you should have done more, been better, tried harder. I understand all of it." Rowan finally turned to look at her, really look at her, and something in his expression shifted. "Your father." It wasn't a question. Elena nodded anyway. "Gambling. Started small. Cards with friends, small bets at the races. Then it became everything. He'd gamble away the household money, then lie about it. Gamble away the rents from our tenants, then borrow to cover the losses. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, we were drowning in debt." She looked down at her raw hands. "I tried everything, talked to him, pleaded with him, hid money where he couldn't find it. Nothing worked. He'd promised to stop, then be at the tables again the next night. And every time I blamed myself for not finding the right words, the right approach, the right way to make him see reason. But it wasn't your fault. No more than Catherine's death was yours." Elena met his eyes directly. "We can't save people from themselves, Rowan. We can only decide whether to let their destruction take us down too." The use of his first name hung in the air between them, intimate and dangerous. Rowan didn't correct her. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "With your father." "I survived. I learned to steal back the household money before he could gamble it. I forged his signature on letters to our creditors, buying us more time. I became very good at lying, at hiding, at keeping us afloat while he did everything he could to sink us." Her smile was bitter. "And when even that wasn't enough, when the debts finally came due and there was nowhere left to hide, I let him sell me to clear his conscience. To me. To you." Elena's laugh was sharp. "So here we are, two people trying to survive the wreckage of other people's choices." Rowan was quiet for a long moment, studying her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Then he poured whiskey into a second glass and slid it across the desk toward her. "To survival," he said. Elena took the glass. "To survival." The whiskey burned going down, raw and harsh. She'd never developed a taste for alcohol, had seen too much of what it did to people. But tonight, in this study with this broken man who somehow understood the particular flavor of her pain, it felt appropriate. They sat in silence after that, passing the bottle back and forth, not talking, just existing in the same space. It wasn't comfort exactly, more like a ceasefire. Two wounded people agreeing not to make each other's pain worse. When Elena finally left hours later, Rowan didn't tell her not to come back, and she didn't promise that she would, but they both knew she'd be there the next night, and the night after that. The servants noticed, of course. Within a week, the whispers had intensified. "She's spending time with him," Elena overheard one of the maids saying, "late at night, alone." "Probably thinks she can change him," another replied. "Thinks she's special. They all do. She'll learn. He'll break her like he breaks everything else." Mrs. Hartwell pulled Elena aside one morning, her expression harder than usual. "Whatever you're doing with his grace, stop." "I'm not doing anything." "Don't lie to me, girl. The whole household knows you're visiting him at night. It's inappropriate and it's dangerous." "Dangerous how?" Elena asked. "He's not violent." "Not yet." The housekeeper's eyes were sharp. "But he's unstable, unpredictable. And you're playing with fire, thinking you can reach him when everyone else has failed." "I'm not trying to reach him. I'm just—" Elena stopped, unsure how to explain something she barely understood herself. "You're just what? Keeping him company? Being his friend?" Mrs. Hartwell's laugh was harsh. "He doesn't want friends. He doesn't want help. He wants to suffer, and anyone who gets close will suffer with him. Take my advice and stay away before you get hurt." But Elena couldn't stay away. Every night she found herself walking to that study, sitting in that chair, existing in that careful silence with a man who was slowly learning how to be human again. They talked sometimes. Small things at first, the weather, the state of the estate, the incompetence of the solicitors who'd arranged their marriage without consulting either of them. Then deeper things. Rowan told her about growing up in the manor, about his father's death, about the crushing weight of responsibility he'd inherited too young. Elena told him about her mother's quiet desperation, about learning to forge documents, about the slow death of her family's reputation. Other nights, they didn't talk at all. Just sat together while Rowan's demons raged, and Elena's presence somehow made them more bearable. The household's hostility grew with each passing day. Agnes started giving Elena the worst tasks, scrubbing grease traps, cleaning out the root cellar, hauling coal. The other servants accidentally spilled things on her, knocked into her, made her work twice as hard for half the results. "You think you're better than us," one of the footmen said one afternoon, his voice dripping with contempt. "Think because you're warming the Duke's bed, you don't have to follow the rules." "I'm not—" Elena started, but he cut her off. "Save it. We all know what you are. A social climber who thought marrying a Duke would make her a lady. But look at you, scrubbing pots like the rest of us. The Duke doesn't want you. No one wants you. You're just another burden on a house that's already falling apart." The words stung because they held a kernel of truth. She was a burden, an unwanted complication in a household that had learned to function around its broken master. Her presence disrupted their carefully maintained routine, but she kept showing up anyway, kept working during the day and sitting with Rowan at night, kept pushing against the tide of hostility because the alternative, giving up, disappearing into the background, accepting her exile, felt like a slower kind of death. 2 weeks after her arrival, everything came to a head. It was past midnight when Elena heard the crash, louder than usual, followed by what sounded like someone falling. She was out of bed and running before conscious thought caught up, her bare feet slapping against cold stone. The study door was closed, but she could hear ragged breathing from inside. She knocked once, urgently. "Rowan, are you hurt?" No answer, just that labored breathing and a sound that might have been a groan. Elena tried the handle. Locked. "Rowan, open the door, please." Nothing. She made a decision in that moment that would change everything. Instead of going for help that wouldn't come, help that the household refused to give, she put her shoulder against the door and pushed. The lock was old, poorly maintained. On the third try, it gave way with a crack of splintering wood. Rowan was on the floor beside his desk, curled in on himself, his whole body shaking with tremors that looked almost like seizures. Blood stained his knuckles. He'd put his fist through the window, glass shards glittering in the lamplight. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something Elena couldn't see. "No, no, no," he was muttering. "Can't save her, can't reach her. She's dying and I can't." Elena dropped to her knees beside him, glass crunching under her weight. "Rowan, Listen to me. You're not there. You're here. It's over. He didn't seem to hear her, lost in whatever nightmare had dragged him under. His breathing was getting worse, rapid and shallow, like he couldn't get enough air. Without thinking, Elena grabbed his shoulders and shook him. Rowan, come back. Now. His eyes snapped to her face, still wild, but with a flicker of recognition. Elena? Yes, it's me. You're safe. You're here. She kept her voice firm, grounding. Breathe slowly. Match my breathing. She demonstrated, exaggerating each breath until he started to mirror her unconsciously. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the tremors subsided. The wild look in his eyes faded to something more present, more aware. The window, he said hoarsely, looking at his bloody hand like it belonged to someone else. We'll deal with it. Elena pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, one of the few nice things she'd brought from home, and wrapped it around his knuckles, applying pressure to stop the bleeding. Can you stand? I'm not sure. Try. Lean on me. Together, they got him upright, Rowan leaning heavily on Elena's shoulder as she maneuvered him away from the broken glass and into his chair. His shirt was soaked with sweat, his hair plastered to his forehead. He looked like he'd been through a war. I thought she was here, he said after a long moment. I could see her in the corner, wasting away, and I couldn't move. Couldn't help, just like before. It was a nightmare, that's all. It felt real. I know. Elena found a bottle of water on the desk and pressed it into his good hand. Drink. He obeyed mechanically, and Elena took the opportunity to look at his injured hand more carefully. The cuts were deep but clean. He'd need proper bandaging, maybe stitches. I need to get supplies from the infirmary, she said. Will you be all right for a few minutes? Rowan's hand shot out and caught her wrist, surprisingly strong. Don't leave. The raw fear in his voice stopped her cold. Rowan, please, just don't leave yet. I can't. He stopped, swallowing hard. I can't be alone right now. Elena looked at his bloody hand, at the broken window, at the man who was finally asking for help instead of pushing it away. She thought of Mrs. Hartwell's warning, of the servant's contempt, of all the reasons she should walk away right now and let someone else deal with this. Then she sat down in her chair and took his uninjured hand in both of hers. I'm not going anywhere, she said, and she meant it. They sat like that until dawn started to creep through the broken window, Elena holding Rowan's hand while he slowly came back to himself. When the first light touched the horizon, he finally spoke. Thank you. For what? For staying, for not running, for... He gestured vaguely with his bandaged hand. For treating me like a person instead of a monster. You're not a monster, Rowan. You're just hurt. There's a difference. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Why do you care? You barely know me. This marriage was forced on both of us. You owe me nothing. Elena thought about that. Why did she care? It would be easier not to. Easier to do her work, keep her head down, survive her exile without getting emotionally involved with a man who was clearly still in love with a ghost. But she'd spent too many years watching her father destroy himself while everyone else looked away. She'd learned what it cost to be the only person willing to step into someone's hell and offer a hand out. Because someone has to, she said finally, and because I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning with no one willing to throw you a rope. Rowan's grip on her hand tightened. I don't deserve... Stop. Elena's voice was sharp. Stop deciding what you do or don't deserve. You're a human being in pain. That's all that matters. For the first time since she'd met him, Rowan Blackmore looked at her like she was real. Not a ghost, not a burden, not an unwanted obligation. Real. You're dangerous, he said quietly. How so? You make me want to try, to get better, to... He stopped, shaking his head. I've spent 5 years building walls to keep everyone out, and you just walked right through them like they weren't even there. Maybe they shouldn't be there, Elena said. Maybe you've been locked up long enough. Before he could respond, footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. Multiple sets moving quickly. The door, already damaged from Elena's forced entry, was pushed open, and Mrs. Hartwell stood framed in the doorway, her expression carved from ice. Behind her, Graves and two other servants crowded in, taking in the scene. The broken window, the blood, Elena sitting far too close to the Duke with his hand in hers. "What," Mrs. Hartwell said with deadly calm, "is going on here?" Elena stood slowly, keeping herself between Rowan and the hostile stares. "The Duke had an accident. I was helping." "An accident." The housekeeper's eyes swept the room, cataloging every detail. "And the broken door?" "He was hurt. The door was locked. I did what I had to do." "You had no right." "I had every right." Elena's voice was steady, though her heart hammered in her chest. "I'm his wife, whether any of you want to acknowledge that or not." The servants exchanged glances. Graves stepped forward, his expression harder than Elena had ever seen it. "Mrs. Blackmore," he said, making her title sound like an insult. "You've been here 2 weeks and you've done nothing but cause disruption. You've neglected your duties, spent inappropriate time alone with His Grace, and now you've destroyed property. This cannot continue." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have a choice." Graves's voice was cold as winter stone. "You can accept your place in this household. Work with the servants, stay out of the residential wings, stop interfering with His Grace. Or you can leave, pack your things, and go back to whatever family was willing to sell you. But you cannot continue as you have been." The ultimatum hung in the air, brutal and final. Elena felt Rowan tense behind her. When she glanced back, he was standing, swaying slightly, but his eyes were clearer than she'd seen them in weeks. "Graves," he said, his voice rough but carrying an edge of authority that had been missing before. "You will not speak to my wife that way." The butler's expression didn't change. "Your Grace, with respect, leave, all of you, now." For a moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Hartwell inclined her head with icy precision and turned to go. The others followed, Graves's face tight with barely suppressed anger. When the door closed behind them, Elena turned to find Rowan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yes," Elena said, "I did. Because somewhere between scrubbing pots and breaking down doors, between sitting in silence and holding his hand through nightmares, she'd made a choice. Not to save him, that wasn't hers to do, but to stand beside him anyway, consequences be damned. The household wanted her gone. The servants wanted her to disappear. Even Rowan himself had spent weeks trying to push her away. But Elena Ward had spent too long being pushed around by people who thought she didn't matter. She wasn't going anywhere. The silence after the servants left felt heavier than any words could have been. Elena watched Rowan sink back into his chair, the momentary burst of authority draining out of him like water from a cracked vessel. His bandaged hand rested on the armrest, blood already seeping through the makeshift wrapping. He looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical fatigue, like defending her had cost him reserves he didn't have. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly. "They had no right to threaten you." "They have every right. I've been breaking their rules since the day I arrived." Elena moved to the broken window, carefully avoiding the glass scattered across the floor. Dawnlight was spilling across the moorland now, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. "They want me gone, Rowan. And honestly, I can't blame them. I've been nothing but trouble. You've been the only honest thing in this house for 5 years." The words hit harder than they should have. Elena turned to find Rowan watching her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. "Honest," she repeated. "I've been lying to them about why I spend my nights here. I've been pretending I can handle work I'm clearly not suited for. I've been acting like I belong when we both know—" "You belong here more than anyone." Rowan stood, swaying slightly but steady enough. "They've been enabling my self-destruction for years. You're the first person who looked at me and saw something worth saving." "I'm not trying to save you." "I know. That's why it's working." He moved closer, and Elena found herself backed against the window frame, acutely aware of how improper this was. Alone in his study, both of them barely dressed, her in a nightgown and him in a blood-stained shirt. "You just sit with me. Listen. Don't judge. Don't try to fix me. Just exist beside me. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Elena's throat felt tight. "The servants won't accept this. Whatever this is. They'll make my life hell until I leave." "Then don't give them the satisfaction. Rowan's good hand came up, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. The touch was feather light, but it sent electricity down her spine. Stay, fight, show them you're not going anywhere. Why do you care? The question came out more raw than she'd intended. 2 weeks ago, you could barely look at me. Now you're defending me against your own household. What changed? Rowan's expression shifted into something complicated, guilt and hope and fear all tangled together. You changed. Or maybe I did. I don't know anymore. His hand dropped. All I know is that for the first time since Catherine died, I can breathe. And it's because you're here. The confession hung between them, dangerous and honest. Elena should step back, should put distance between herself and this broken man who was looking at her like she was oxygen, should remember that she was married to him out of necessity, not choice, and getting emotionally tangled would only make everything worse. But she didn't step back. Your hand needs proper bandaging, she said instead, and that window needs boarding up before the next storm. Something like disappointment flickered across Rowan's face, quickly masked. Always practical. One of us has to be. Elena moved past him, careful not to touch. I'll get supplies. You should change your shirt. She left before he could argue, before the strange tension in the room could crystallize into something neither of them was ready to name. The corridors were coming alive with morning activity, servants moving with practiced efficiency, pointedly ignoring Elena as she made her way to the infirmary. She could feel their stares burning into her back, could hear whispers starting up in her wake. Shameless. Thinks she owns the place now. Give her a week. She'll be gone like all the others. Elena kept walking, spine straight, refusing to let them see how their words cut. She'd survived worse than hostile servants. She could survive this. The infirmary was a small room off the kitchen, poorly stocked but adequate for basic injuries. Elena gathered what she needed: clean bandages, antiseptic, needle and thread for stitches if the cuts were deep enough. Mrs. Hartwell appeared in the doorway as she was packing supplies into a basket. A word, Mrs. Blackmore. It wasn't a request. Elena set down the basket and turned to face the housekeeper's cold fury. What you're doing is dangerous, Mrs. Hartwell said without preamble. Not just for you, for him. I'm helping him. You're giving him false hope. The housekeeper's voice was sharp as broken glass. Do you know how many people have tried to help His Grace over the years? His cousin sent physicians. The solicitors sent consultants. There was even a woman from the city, some kind of spiritual healer, who promised she could cure his melancholy. You know what happened to all of them? Elena waited. He destroyed them. Not intentionally, perhaps, but the result was the same. They came here thinking they could fix him, and he pulled them down into his darkness until they couldn't take it anymore and fled. He doesn't get better, Mrs. Blackmore. He just drags everyone else down with him. That's not what I see. Then you're blind. Mrs. Hartwell stepped closer, her expression almost pitying. You think you're different, special, that your presence will somehow succeed where everyone else failed, but you're just another woman deluding herself into thinking she can save a man who doesn't want to be saved. The words stung because they echoed Elena's own doubts. Maybe I am deluding myself, but at least I'm trying. Trying will get you hurt, or worse. The housekeeper's voice dropped. The first Duchess tried too, tried to reach him, tried to pull him out of whatever darkness he was sinking into, and it destroyed her. Broke her mind until there was nothing left. Is that what you want? To end up like Catherine, wasting away in a locked room because you couldn't save the man you thought you loved? Elena felt cold settle into her bones. What are you saying? That Rowan drove Catherine mad? I'm saying this house, this isolation, this man, it's all poison. And if you're not careful, it'll poison you too. Mrs. Hartwell picked up the basket of medical supplies. I'll have someone bring these to His Grace. You're needed in the kitchen. Agnes is short-handed today. I'm going myself. You're going to the kitchen. That's an order. They stood facing each other, two women locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Elena spoke. I'm the Duchess of Blackmore. I don't take orders from servants. Mrs. Hartwell's expression went absolutely glacial. Then perhaps it's time you learned your place. You're not a duchess. You're a purchased bride with no power, no allies, and no future in this house. The The servants answer to me, not you. The estate runs on my authority, not yours. And if you continue to disrupt the household, I will make sure you regret it. Is that a threat? It's a promise. The housekeeper turned to leave, then paused. The village doctor comes once a month to check on the staff. He'll be here in 3 days. If you want to leave this place before it destroys you, I suggest you ask him for passage back to civilization. Otherwise, you'll end up just another ghost haunting these halls. She left, taking the medical supplies with her. Elena stood alone in the infirmary, hands shaking with anger and fear in equal measure. The housekeeper's words had found their mark. Every doubt Elena had been trying to ignore now screamed for attention. Was she deluding herself? Was she just another foolish woman thinking she could fix a broken man? Would she end up like Catherine, driven mad by isolation and hopelessness? But when she thought of Rowan, of the way his nightmares were getting less frequent, of how he'd actually stood up to Graves this morning, of the first flickers of life returning to his eyes, she couldn't convince herself to walk away. She went to the kitchen instead, where Agnes set her to work scrubbing the massive cooking pots from breakfast. The work was brutal and degrading, but Elena threw herself into it, channeling her frustration into physical labor. Around her, the other servants whispered, "Did you hear what she said to Mrs. Hartwell? Called herself the Duchess, as if anyone believes that. Duke probably doesn't even remember marrying her, just another ghost his solicitors conjured up." Elena scrubbed harder, ignoring them. But as the morning wore on, she became aware of something shifting in the household's attitude. It wasn't just hostility anymore. It was coordinated cruelty. Her breakfast portion was smaller than everyone else's. When she reached for bread, someone moved the basket out of reach. The other servants bumped into her accidentally, making her drop dishes, then blamed her for the breakage. Agnes assigned her to clean the grease trap, the foulest job in the kitchen, and offered no guidance, ensuring Elena would do it wrong and have to start over. By noon, Elena was exhausted, filthy, and trembling with suppressed rage. But she kept working, kept pushing through, because giving up would mean admitting Mrs. Hartwell was right. She didn't see Rowan all day. Didn't know if he'd bandaged his hand properly, didn't know if the window had been repaired, didn't know if he was spiraling back into darkness without her there to anchor him. That night, she waited in her small room until the manor fell silent, then made her way to the study as she had every night for 2 weeks. But when she reached the residential wing, she found her path blocked. Graves stood in the corridor, arms crossed, expression carved from stone. "His Grace is not receiving visitors tonight." "I'm not a visitor. I'm his wife." "His Grace specifically requested that you not be disturbed. He's resting." It was a lie. Elena could hear movement from the study, restless pacing, the sound of bottles clinking. Rowan wasn't resting. He was alone with his demons, and Graves had been ordered to keep her away. "Let me pass," Elena said quietly. "I cannot do that." "Then I'll go around you." She tried to step past him, but Graves moved to block her, his presence a wall of disapproval. "Mrs. Blackmore, you're making this harder than it needs to be. His Grace is not well. Your presence agitates him. The household has decided. The household doesn't get to decide who I see. The household runs this manor. You would do well to remember that." Elena felt something snap inside her. The careful control she'd been maintaining for 2 weeks, the polite deference she'd shown to servants who treated her like dirt, the patience she'd exercised in the face of constant humiliation, all of it crumbled. "Get out of my way!" "No." So Elena did something she'd never done in her life. She grabbed a decorative vase from a nearby table and threw it at the wall beside Graves's head. It exploded in a shower of porcelain, the crash echoing through the corridor like a gunshot. The study door opened immediately. Rowan stood framed in lamplight, his injured hand now properly bandaged, his expression shocked. "What the hell? Your butler won't let me pass," Elena said, her voice shaking. "He says I'm not allowed to see you, that the household has decided I'm bad for your health." Rowan's eyes went from Elena to Graves, something dangerous kindling in his expression. "Is this true?" Graves straightened. "Your Grace, we're only thinking of your well-being. Mrs. Blackmore's presence has been causing disruption. I don't recall asking for your opinion on my well-being. With respect, sir, you haven't been in a position to make sound decisions for some time. The household staff has been protecting you, maintaining order. By deciding who I can and cannot see in my own home, Rowan's voice was quiet, deadly. By treating my wife like an unwanted intruder? She is an unwanted intruder. Graves's mask finally cracked, years of resentment spilling out. She's a nobody, sold off by a gambling father who came here thinking she could play Duchess and fix what's broken. But this house doesn't need fixing, Your Grace. It needs to be left alone, just like you need to be left alone. The words hung in the air, brutal in their honesty. Rowan took a step forward, and for the first time since Elena had met him, he looked like the Duke he was supposed to be, commanding, dangerous, not someone to be dismissed or managed. "You're fired," he said simply. "Pack your things and be gone by morning." Graves went white. "Your Grace, I've served this family for 30 years. And for the last 5, you've been enabling my self-destruction because it was easier than actually helping. You've isolated me, kept people away, let me rot in these rooms because it meant less work for you. Well, congratulations, you succeeded, but it ends now." Rowan gestured toward the servants' wing. "Get out, and take Mrs. Hartwell with you. I want both of you gone by sunrise. You can't run this estate without us. Watch me." Graves stood there for another moment, trembling with suppressed fury. Then he gave a stiff bow and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor like hammer strikes. When he was gone, Rowan sagged against the doorframe, the burst of authority clearly having cost him everything he had. "You didn't have to do that," Elena said quietly. "Yes, I did. They've been running this place like I'm an invalid who can't make his own decisions. I'm done being managed." He met her eyes. "But I didn't tell Graves to keep you away. You believe that, don't you?" "I believe you." Elena stepped closer. "But firing your senior staff, Rowan, how are we supposed to run the estate? Neither of us knows how to manage a household this size." "We'll figure it out." He smiled, bitter and exhausted. "Or we'll fail spectacularly. Either way, at least we'll be failing on our own terms." That night, they sat in the study as usual, but something had shifted. The careful distance they'd been maintaining felt suddenly flimsy. Rowan was more present, more engaged, asking questions about her life before the marriage that she'd never expected him to care about. And Elena found herself answering honestly, sharing things she'd never told anyone, not just about her father's gambling, but about her own fears, her own sense of being trapped by circumstances beyond her control. "I used to dream about running away," she admitted at one point, "just taking a horse and disappearing into the night, starting over somewhere no one knew me." "Why didn't you?" "Because running away doesn't solve anything. The problems just follow you." She looked at him directly. "Like you hiding in this manner. You're running from Catherine's death, but you can't actually escape it. It's everywhere you look." "I'm not running. I'm accepting my punishment." "They're the same thing." Elena leaned forward. "You're letting guilt define your entire existence. But Catherine's death, it wasn't your fault, Rowan. You couldn't have saved her." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do, because some people can't be saved. They're drowning and they won't grab the rope, or they grab it and then let go, or they pull you under with them. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Trust me, I tried with my father for years." Rowan was quiet for a long time, then, "What finally made you stop trying?" "When I realized I was drowning too, that if I didn't let go, he'd take me down with him." Elena's voice cracked. "So I let him sell me to you, let him use me to clear his debts, because it was the only way to survive. That must have hurt." "It did, still does." She looked down at her raw, work-roughened hands. "But I'm still here, still breathing. That has to count for something." "It counts for everything." Rowan reached across the space between them and took her hand, carefully, like she might break. "You're the bravest person I've ever met." "I'm not brave. I'm just stubborn." "Same thing, sometimes." They sat like that, hands linked, until dawn started to creep through the windows again. And when Elena finally left, Rowan stood at the door and said, "Thank you, for staying, for fighting for me even when I couldn't fight for myself." Elena didn't know how to respond to that, so she just nodded and walked away, her heart doing complicated things in her chest. But the fragile peace didn't last. The next morning, Elena woke to find her door wouldn't open. Someone had locked it from the outside. She pounded on the wood, shouting, but no one came. Through the thin walls, she could hear the household moving about their morning routines, pointedly ignoring her calls for help. Panic started to set in. She was trapped, locked in a tiny servant's room with no way out, no food, no water. Think. Don't panic. Think. The window. It was small, grimy, but potentially large enough to squeeze through. Elena dragged her chair over and climbed up, wrestling with the warped frame until it finally gave way with a screech of old wood. Cold air hit her face. She was 3 stories up, looking down at cobblestones that would definitely break bones if she fell. But there was a ledge, narrow, crumbling, but continuous around this side of the building. Elena took a deep breath and climbed through. The wind immediately tried to tear her from her precarious perch. She pressed herself flat against the stone wall, inching sideways, her fingers scrabbling for purchase in the gaps between stones. Don't look down. Don't think about falling. Just move. It took an eternity to reach the next window, a larger one that opened into what looked like a storage room. Elena tested the frame. Locked. Of course. She picked up a loose stone from the ledge and smashed it through the glass, reaching through to work the latch. The window swung open and she half fell, half climbed inside, landing hard on dusty floorboards. For a moment she just lay there, breathing hard, her whole body shaking with adrenaline. Then she stood, brushed glass from her nightgown, and went to find whoever had locked her in. The manor was strangely quiet. Too quiet. None of the usual morning sounds, no clattering from the kitchen, no servants moving through the corridors. Elena made her way downstairs, dread building with each step. The servants' hall was empty. The kitchen, cold and abandoned. The stables stripped of horses. They were gone. All of them. Graves and Mrs. Hartwell hadn't just left. They'd taken the entire household with them. Every servant, every stable hand, every person who kept the manor running. It was a calculated blow, leaving Rowan and Elena completely isolated on the moorland with winter approaching and no help for miles. Elena ran to the study, her bare feet slapping against cold stone. Rowan was there, staring at a note left on his desk, his expression unreadable. "They're gone," he said without looking up. "Every single one. Graves left this." He handed her the paper. Elena read it, her hands starting to shake. "Your Grace, we cannot in good conscience continue to serve a household that has abandoned all propriety and reason. Mrs. Blackmore's influence has proven destructive to your health and to the manor's proper function. We have therefore taken positions elsewhere. The butcher in the village has been notified to stop deliveries. The solicitors have been informed of the estate's abandonment. We suggest you send Mrs. Blackmore away before she completes your ruin. Graves." "This is my fault," Elena whispered. "They left because of me." "They left because they're cowards who couldn't handle change." Rowan's voice was flat. "But they're not wrong about one thing. We're in serious trouble. There's maybe a week's worth of food in the larder. No one to maintain the fires or manage the property. Winter's coming and we're completely alone out here. We could go to the village and be turned away. Graves will have poisoned them against us by now." He laughed bitterly. "This is what I get for finally trying to live again. Total isolation." Elena looked around the study, at the manor beyond, at the impossible situation they'd been dropped into. They could leave, could pack what little they had and try to make it to the nearest city, throw themselves on the mercy of Rowan's relatives who'd arranged this marriage in the first place. Or they could stay, could fight to survive in this hostile place with winter coming and no one to help them. It was a terrible choice, an impossible choice. But Elena had survived terrible, impossible choices before. "Then we learn," she said. "We learn to cook, to maintain fires, to run this place ourselves. We survive." "Elena, no. Listen to me." She grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You spent 5 years letting other people decide how you'd live, letting them manage you, control you, enable your self-destruction. Well, they're gone now. It's just us. And I refuse to let this place break us. We're going to survive. Together." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, fear giving way to something that might have been hope. "You're serious?" "Completely. You realize we could die out here. No servants, no help. Winter coming. Then we'll die trying. But I'm not giving up, and neither are you." For a long moment, Rowan just stared at her. Then, incredibly, he smiled. A real smile, the first she'd seen from him. "You're insane." "Probably. Are you with me?" He took her hand. "Yes. God help us both. But yes." They spent the day taking inventory. The larder held less than Rowan had estimated, maybe 4 days of food if they rationed carefully. The coal stores were adequate, but someone would need to haul it from the cellar daily to keep the manor from freezing. The livestock in the outlying buildings had been left behind, but neither Elena nor Rowan knew the first thing about animal husbandry. "We'll figure it out," Elena said with more confidence than she felt. "One problem at a time." That first night alone in the manor was surreal. Elena cooked dinner badly, burning the stew and under-seasoning everything, while Rowan struggled to light fires in enough rooms to keep them from freezing. They ate in the formal dining room, just the two of them at opposite ends of a table meant for 20. The absurdity of their situation almost funny. "This is terrible," Rowan said, forcing down another spoonful of charred stew. "I know. I'll do better tomorrow." "Will you?" "Probably not, but I'll keep trying." He laughed, and the sound echoed through the empty manor, lonely and defiant. They established a routine over the next few days. Wake at dawn, split the work, Elena handling the cooking and basic cleaning while Rowan managed the fires and tried to keep the manor's infrastructure from collapsing. It was exhausting, often futile work. The bread Elena tried to bake came out dense as bricks. The fires kept dying. The cold seeped through every wall, no matter how many rooms they abandoned. But they survived. And something else happened too. Without the servants between them, without the careful boundaries they'd maintained, Elena and Rowan were forced into constant proximity, working side by side, sharing meals, collapsing exhausted into chairs each evening, and talking, really talking, about everything they'd lost and everything they were trying to build from the ruins. "Tell me about your mother," Rowan said one night. Elena hesitated. "She was weak. Let my father destroy everything rather than stand up to him." "Or maybe she was doing what she had to do to survive." Rowan's voice was gentle. "Like you." "I'm nothing like her." "You're exactly like her. You learned how to survive impossible situations by bending instead of breaking. There's no shame in that." Elena had never thought of it that way, had always seen her mother's passivity as cowardice rather than strategy. But maybe Rowan was right. Maybe survival came in different forms, and none of them were pretty. On the fourth night, a storm rolled in. It started with wind, howling across the moorland with a fury that rattled every window in the manor. Then rain, driving sideways, finding every crack and gap in the old stone walls. Thunder shook the foundations. Lightning turned the world white and stark. Elena was in the kitchen, trying to salvage dinner, when she heard the crash from upstairs. She ran, taking the stairs two at a time, and found Rowan in the main corridor, staring at a massive hole in the ceiling where rain was now pouring through. "The roof's caving in," he shouted over the storm. "The west wing. It's been damaged for years, and now—" Another crash, closer. A beam gave way, tumbling through the hole and smashing into the floor below. Water cascaded down, already pooling on the stone. "We need to evacuate this section," Elena said. "Close it off before the whole wing collapses." "It's spreading. Look." Rowan pointed to cracks forming in the walls, racing outward like lightning. "The whole structure's compromised. If this keeps up—" He didn't need to finish. The west wing came down. It could take part of the residential section with it, including Rowan's study, including the rooms they'd been living in. They spent the next hour in desperate damage control, hauling furniture out of threatened rooms, trying to shore up supports with whatever they could find, all while the storm raged and the manor groaned like a dying animal around them. Elena was dragging a trunk through a corridor when she heard Rowan scream her name. She dropped everything and ran, finding him in what had been Catherine's tower room, the place where the first Duchess had died. The door stood open, something Rowan had said never happened. And inside, the room was exactly as it must have been 5 years ago. Furniture draped in white sheets, ghost-like and terrible. Personal effects still scattered about. A hairbrush, a book of poetry, a shawl draped over a chair. And on the wall, written in what looked like charcoal, the same words over and over, I can't breathe here. I can't breathe. Let me out, please. I can't breathe. Rowan stood frozen in the doorway, his face absolutely white, staring at the words like they were written in blood. I locked this room, he said, his voice hollow. 5 years ago. I locked it, and I never. How is it open? The storm. Elena tried to pull him away. The wind must have... No, I locked it. I made sure. He stepped inside, moving like a sleepwalker, reaching out to touch the words on the wall. She wrote this. Near the end. When she'd stopped making sense. When she was too far gone to save. Rowan, don't. I should have understood. Should have known what she needed. But I was too stupid, too focused on fixing the wrong things. His breathing was getting rapid, shallow. She was suffocating here, and I kept her trapped, and now I'm trapped in the same place, and I can't. He was spiraling. Elena could see it happening, see him falling back into that dark place where Catherine's ghost lived and breathed. The storm, the collapsing manor, this room, it was too much, breaking through whatever fragile stability he'd built. Rowan, look at me. Elena grabbed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. You're not trapped. You're here. With me. In this moment. Breathe. But he couldn't. The panic had him in its teeth, dragging him under. His whole body was shaking, his eyes unfocused, lost somewhere in the past. Elena made a decision born of desperation and instinct. She kissed him. It was graceless, urgent, more assault than affection, just her mouth on his, trying to shock him back to the present. For a second, Rowan went absolutely still, stunned. Then his hands came up, tangling in her hair, and he was kissing her back with a desperation that bordered on violence. It wasn't romantic. It was two drowning people clinging to each other in a storm, trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan's eyes were clear, present. Elena. Thunder crashed directly overhead. The manor shuddered, and from somewhere in the west wing came a sound like the world ending, a massive groaning collapse as the damaged roof finally gave way. They ran. Through corridors filling with water, around falling debris, racing ahead of the destruction spreading through the manor like cancer. Behind them, Catherine's tower room, that cursed, haunted space, collapsed into rubble, buried under stone and rain and 5 years of accumulated grief. They made it to the entrance hall just as the west wing fell in on itself with a roar that shook the earth. Dust and rain billowed through the manor, coating everything in gray. Then silence, except for the storm. Elena and Rowan stood in the ruined entrance hall, soaked to the skin, covered in dust and scratches, staring at the destruction of the manor's west wing. It's gone, Rowan said numbly. Her room. Everything. Just gone. I'm sorry. No. He turned to look at Elena, and there was something different in his eyes. Something broken open. It needed to be gone. That room, it was a shrine to my guilt. And it almost killed me tonight. He took her hand, his grip tight enough to hurt. You pulled me back. Again. We pulled each other back. The storm was weakening now, the worst of it passing. But the damage was done. The west wing was destroyed. Half the manor was uninhabitable. And they were still alone, still trapped, still fighting to survive with winter closing in. But they were alive. And they were together. Elena looked at Rowan, at this man who'd been a stranger 3 weeks ago, who'd become something she couldn't quite name. Friend didn't cover it. Neither did husband, not really. He was something else, someone who understood her particular brand of survival, who'd seen her at her worst and hadn't flinched. What do we do now? She asked. Rowan looked around at the ruined manor, at the storm still raging outside, at the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. Then he looked back at Elena and smiled, reckless and real and almost hopeful. We survive, just like you said, together. And in the wreckage of Blackmore Manor, with Catherine's ghost finally laid to rest in the rubble and the storm still howling its fury, Elena felt something shift inside her chest. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever, but something just as dangerous. Purpose. She'd found someone worth fighting for, worth surviving for. And she'd be damned if she'd let this place, this storm, or anything else take that away. The morning after the storm revealed the full scope of the disaster. Elena stood in what remained of the entrance hall, surveying the damage with a kind of numb detachment. The west wing was completely gone. Just a gaping hole where rooms used to be, exposing the manor's skeleton to open sky. Water had flooded through most of the ground floor. Debris covered everything, and in the cold light of day, the reality of their situation felt crushingly heavy. They had maybe 3 days of food left, no servants, no help coming. Winter was weeks away at most, and half the manor was now uninhabitable. "We should leave," Rowan said from behind her. He looked haggard in the dawn light, dark circles under his eyes, his bandaged hand still seeping blood through the wrappings. "Pack what we can carry and try to make it to the next town before the roads become impassable." "And go where? To your relatives who arranged this marriage without consulting you? To my father who sold me to clear his debts?" Elena shook her head. "We'd be begging for scraps from people who've already proven they don't care about us. At least we'd be alive." "Would we?" Elena turned to face him. "Or would we just be slowly dying somewhere else, dependent on the mercy of people who've shown us none?" Rowan's jaw tightened. "What's the alternative? Stay here and freeze to death when winter hits? Starve when the food runs out?" "The alternative is we stop running." Elena gestured at the ruined manor. "This place tried to kill us last night. The storm, the collapse, it should have broken us. But we're still standing. That has to mean something." "It means we got lucky." "No, it means we're stronger than we thought." Elena moved closer, her voice gaining conviction. "You've been hiding in this manor for 5 years, letting it be your prison. Well, half of it's gone now. Catherine's Tower, that study where you tortured yourself every night, it's all rubble. The past literally collapsed. Maybe that's what needed to happen." Rowan stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "You want to stay in this wreck with winter coming?" "I want to fight. I want to prove that we can survive, not just in spite of this place, but because of it." She grabbed his good hand. "The servants left because they thought we'd fail, thought we'd come crawling back begging for help. Let's prove them wrong." "Elena, 3 days of food. Fine. Then we figure out how to get more. The village might hate us, but they'll still take our money. We have livestock in the outbuildings that we can learn to manage. We have each other." She squeezed his hand harder. "I didn't survive my father's gambling, a forced marriage, and hostile servants just to give up now because things got difficult." For a long moment, Rowan just looked at her. Then, incredibly, he laughed. Short and disbelieving, but genuine. "You're serious? You actually want to do this?" "Completely serious. We could die. We could die anywhere. At least here we die on our own terms." Elena smiled, fierce and a little reckless. "So what do you say, husband? Are we doing this?" Rowan's expression shifted through several emotions before landing on something that looked almost like hope. "You're insane." "That's not an answer." "Yes." He pulled her closer, and there was that same intensity from last night's kiss, desperation and determination tangled together. "Let's do this. Let's rebuild." They started with the basics. Food first. That was the most urgent need. Rowan found a horse the servants hadn't taken, probably because it was old and half lame. Elena wrote out a list while he saddled it, her handwriting shaky from exhaustion. "Take this to the village," she said, handing him the list along with what coins they'd found in the manor's safe. "Get as much as you can. If they refuse to sell to you, I'll make them sell." Rowan's voice was harder than she'd heard it. "They don't get to starve us out just because the servants poisoned them against us." He left before noon, and Elena was alone in the ruined manor for the first time since arriving. The silence was oppressive, broken only by water dripping through holes in the ceiling and wind whistling through gaps in the walls. She should have been terrified, should have used this time to pack her things and flee while she still could. But instead, she found herself moving through the intact sections of the manor with purpose, taking inventory of what could be salvaged. The kitchen was waterlogged but functional. The larder, miraculously, had stayed mostly dry. 2 of the upstairs bedrooms were intact. The library, dusty and forgotten, held hundreds of books, many of them practical guides on estate management, animal husbandry, and basic survival. Elena carried an armload of books to the kitchen and started reading by the light of the one window that wasn't broken. Agriculture. Preserving food. Managing livestock through winter. The information was dense and often contradictory, but she absorbed it desperately, committing details to memory. By the time Rowan returned hours later, Elena had filled a notebook with information and made a plan. "How did it go?" she asked, looking up from a book on chicken keeping. Rowan's expression was grim as he started unloading supplies. "The butcher refused to sell to me. Said Graves had warned him we were dangerous and unstable. But the general store owner, older woman named Mrs. Finch, she took pity on me. Sold me what she could spare, though at nearly double the normal price. Extortion. Survival." He set down a sack of flour. "She also said the village is taking bets on how long we last. Most give us 2 weeks before we come begging for help." Elena felt anger kindle in her chest. "Then we'll prove them wrong." "With what?" "I got maybe a week's worth of supplies, and that's if we ration severely. We have no way to preserve meat, no proper storage. We have books." Elena gestured at the stack beside her. "Guides on everything from smoking meat to root cellaring. We have outbuildings with livestock that the servants abandoned. We have a working kitchen and intact bedrooms. We have each other." She stood, brushing dust from her ruined dress. "Tomorrow, we start learning. Tonight, we eat, and we rest, and we don't think about failing." They made dinner together, a simple stew from the supplies Rowan had brought, supplemented with vegetables from the manor's neglected kitchen garden. It was the first meal they'd cooked side by side, and the intimacy of it felt strange and natural at once. Rowan chopping vegetables while Elena managed the fire, their movements falling into an unconscious rhythm. "When did you learn to cook?" he asked. "I didn't. I'm making it up as I go." Elena stirred the pot. "Like everything else. You're good at that, making it up. Years of practice. When your father's gambling away the household money, you learn to improvise." They ate at the kitchen table instead of the formal dining room, the space feeling less empty than the grand hall. Outside, the sun was setting over the moorland, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. "Tell me about Catherine," Elena said suddenly. Rowan went still, his spoon halfway to his mouth. "Why?" "Because she's part of this story, part of your story. And if we're going to survive here, I need to understand what happened." For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair. "She was kind. That's what I remember most. Kind in a way that seemed almost otherworldly, like she wasn't quite built for the harshness of real life." His voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. "We were happy at first, or I thought we were. But looking back, I can see the signs I missed. How she'd go quiet for days. How she'd stare out windows like she was looking for something that wasn't there. How she'd smile, but her eyes stayed sad." "Depression," Elena said quietly. "I didn't have a word for it then. Just knew something was wrong and I couldn't fix it. The doctors I brought in, they talked about hysteria, about women's delicate constitutions, about bloodletting and rest cures. Nothing helped. She just kept fading." He stopped, swallowing hard. "The day she locked herself in that tower, I thought she was just having a bad spell, that she'd come out when she was ready. I didn't realize until it was too late that she was saying goodbye," Elena finished. Rowan nodded. "When we finally broke down the door, she barely recognized me. 3 days later, she was gone. And I've been trying to understand why ever since. What I did wrong. What I could have done differently." "Nothing," Elena said firmly. "You could have done nothing differently because this wasn't about you. It was about her own internal battle that you couldn't fight for her." "That's what you said before. But knowing it intellectually and feeling it, those are different things." "I know." Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "But the tower's gone now, literally. You can't keep torturing yourself in a room that doesn't exist anymore." Something shifted in Rowan's expression, grief mixing with something that might have been relief. "Part of me is glad it's gone. The room, the shrine, all of it. Is that terrible?" "No, it's honest." Elena squeezed his hand. "You've been living in a tomb for 5 years. It's not terrible to want to step out into the light." They finished dinner in companionable silence, then worked together to clean up. Another small intimacy that felt significant. As they were drying the last dish, Rowan spoke again. That kiss. Last night. In Catherine's room. Elena's hand stilled. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize. He turned to face her. It saved me. Pulled me back from somewhere dark. But I need to know, was it just shock? Just desperation in the moment? Elena considered lying. It would be safer, smarter, to keep emotional distance between them. They were already tangled up in survival and circumstance. Adding romantic feelings would only complicate things. But she was tired of lying, tired of pretending, tired of careful distance. It was desperation, she admitted, but it was also, I don't know, something else. Something I haven't wanted to examine too closely because it scares me. Why? Because caring about you, really caring, means I can be hurt. And I've spent years learning not to care too deeply about anyone. She set down the dish towel. But somewhere between scrubbing pots and breaking down doors and rebuilding this wreck of a manor, I started caring anyway. And I don't know what to do with that. Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he closed the distance between them, his good hand coming up to cup her face. I don't know either, he said quietly. I loved Catherine. Part of me probably always will. But what I feel for you, it's different, sharper, more real somehow. Like everything with her was a dream and you're the first person who's felt solid in 5 years. That's terrifying, Elena whispered. Completely. He smiled, small and genuine. But we've already decided to stay in a half-ruined manor with winter coming and no help. What's one more terrifying thing? This kiss was different from the one in Catherine's room. Slower, more intentional, less about desperation, and more about choice. Elena felt something settle in her chest. Not quite contentment, but close. Acceptance, maybe. Of this place, this man, this impossible situation they'd chosen together. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. We should probably talk about what this means, he said. Tomorrow. Tonight, let's just exist. Is that okay? More than okay. They spent the evening in the library reading by lamplight, occasionally sharing interesting or useful passages. It felt domestic in a way Elena had never experienced. Comfortable silence, shared purpose, the knowledge that they were building something together, even if they didn't yet know what. The next morning, they started the real work. Elena tackled the livestock first while Rowan worked on winterizing the intact sections of the manor. The chickens were easier than expected. Scatter feed, collect eggs, close them up at night to protect from predators. The goats were more challenging, suspicious, and ornery, but Elena managed to milk 1 after 3 failed attempts and several well-aimed kicks. Success? Rowan called from where he was patching holes in the roof. Elena held up a half-full pail of milk triumphantly. Don't ask how many times I got kicked. I won't, but you're limping. Worth it. Fresh milk means butter, cheese, cream. We won't starve as long as I can keep these temperamental beasts alive. They worked through the morning, breaking only for a quick lunch of bread and cheese. Elena's body ached from unfamiliar labor, hauling water, lifting feed sacks, wrestling with animals who didn't want to cooperate. But it was a good ache, the kind that came from building something rather than destroying yourself. By afternoon, she'd established a basic routine with the livestock and started planning a proper root cellar using one of the manor's undamaged basements. Rowan had managed to weatherproof 2 bedrooms and was working on securing the kitchen against wind and rain. They were exhausted by dinner, both covered in dirt and sweat and minor injuries. But they'd made progress. Real, tangible progress. We need to talk about sleeping arrangements, Rowan said as they were cleaning up from dinner. Elena froze. What about them? You've been staying in that servant's room. It's freezing, barely insulated, and in the section of the manor we're going to have to abandon for winter. The bedrooms I've secured, one of them used to be mine. The other was a guest room. You should take that one. And you? I'll stay in my old room. Elena felt something twist in her chest. Disappointment maybe, though she wasn't sure what she'd been expecting. Separate rooms. Unless you'd prefer... He stopped, looking suddenly uncertain. Elena, I don't want to presume. What we have, whatever this is, it's complicated. And I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't feel pressured. She stepped closer. But I also don't know what's appropriate. We're married legally, but it was arranged. We've kissed twice, but both times we're in crisis. We're trying to survive together, but that doesn't necessarily mean... It doesn't mean anything we don't want it to mean, Rowan finished. So what do you want? Elena thought about that. What did she want? Not separate rooms, that was certain. Not the careful distance they'd been maintaining, but also not to rush into something neither of them was ready for. I want companionship, she said finally. I want to know you're close if the nightmares come back. I want to not be alone in this house that still feels haunted, even with half of it gone. She met his eyes. Is that selfish? No, it's honest. Rowan held out his hand. Come on, I'll show you the rooms and you can decide. The guest room was pleasant enough, clean, warm, with a decent bed and a window overlooking the moorland. It felt safe and separate and lonely. Rowan's room was larger, darker, clearly lived in despite years of neglect. The bed was massive, the kind meant for a married couple. Personal items still scattered about. Books, clothing, signs of life interrupted and never resumed. I haven't slept here since Catherine died, Rowan admitted. Couldn't bear it, but I've been thinking. Maybe it's time to reclaim it. Stop letting the past dictate where I'm allowed to exist. Elena looked at the bed, at the space clearly meant for two people, and made a decision born of exhaustion and honesty and the strange intimacy they'd been building. I'll stay here, with you. If you want. I want. Rowan's voice was rough. But Elena, you need to know, I don't have expectations. This doesn't have to be, we can just sleep, just share space. I don't want you to think, I know. Elena smiled, tired but genuine. Let's just see what happens. No expectations, no pressure, just sharing space. Is that okay? More than okay. That night they lay in the massive bed with careful space between them, both acutely aware of the other's presence. It should have been awkward, should have been uncomfortable. But Elena found herself relaxing into the warmth, the quiet sound of Rowan's breathing, the knowledge that she wasn't alone. Thank you, Rowan said into the darkness. For what? For staying. For choosing this. He paused. For choosing me. Elena rolled over to face him, though she could barely see his features in the dim light. Thank you for letting me stay, for defending me, for being someone worth choosing. She felt him reach across the space between them, his hand finding hers in the darkness. They fell asleep like that, fingers intertwined, two people learning how to exist in the same space without apology or fear. The nightmares came anyway. Elena woke to Rowan thrashing beside her, his breathing rapid and panicked, words tumbling out in broken fragments. Can't save her. Tried. Too late. My fault. She'd seen this before, knew what to do now. She sat up and pulled him toward her, holding him against her chest while his body shook. You're safe, she murmured. You're here. With me. Catherine's at peace. You're safe. It took longer this time for him to surface. But when he did, his arms came around her waist, holding tight like she was the only solid thing in the world. I'm sorry, he said against her shoulder. I thought they were getting better. They are. This was the first one in days. Elena stroked his hair, the gesture automatic and soothing. And you came back faster. That's progress. You shouldn't have to deal with this. Neither should you, but we're doing it together now. She pulled back just enough to see his face. That's the deal, remember? We survived together. That includes the nightmares. Rowan's expression was complicated. Gratitude and shame and something deeper, something that looked almost like love, though neither of them was ready to name it yet. I don't deserve you, he said. Probably not. I don't deserve you either. Elena smiled. Lucky we found each other anyway. They stayed like that until the first light of dawn crept through the windows, holding each other, breathing together, learning how to be a team instead of two separate people fighting their own battles. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Wake at dawn, divide the work, come together for meals and planning sessions. Elena got better at managing the livestock, even started to enjoy the chickens' ridiculous personalities. Rowan made steady progress winterizing the manor, his hands growing calloused from physical labor he'd never done before. They made mistakes. Elena lost 3 chickens to a fox before figuring out proper pen security. Rowan nearly burned down the kitchen trying to smoke meat. The goats escaped twice. The roof leaked in places they hadn't anticipated. But they learned, adapted, survived. A week after the storm, Elena made butter for the first time. It was lumpy and oversalted, but it was theirs, made from milk she'd gotten from goats she'd learned to manage.
"This is terrible," Rowan said, spreading it on bread anyway. "I know. I'll do better next time." "You said that about the bread." "The bread is marginally better now. Give me credit for improvement." He laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. 2 weeks after the storm, a carriage appeared on the road to the manor. Elena was in the yard feeding chickens when she spotted it, her heart immediately sinking. The village coming to mock them? The servants returning to gloat? Either way, it couldn't be good news. She called for Rowan, who emerged from the manor with a hammer still in hand, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair disheveled. Together, they watched the carriage approach. It stopped in the courtyard, and an older woman climbed out, well-dressed, imperious, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the ruined west wing, at Elena's work-roughened hands and simple dress, at Rowan's manual laborer appearance, and her expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been approval. "Rowan Blackmore," she said crisply. "I barely recognized you. Where are your servants?" "Gone, Aunt Margaret." Rowan's voice was carefully neutral. "They abandoned us 2 weeks ago." "So I heard. The whole county's buzzing with it. They say you've lost your mind, that your new wife has driven you to ruin, that the manor is falling apart around your ears." She looked at Elena. "You must be Elena Ward. Or I suppose it's Blackmore now." "It is." Elena lifted her chin. "And you are?" "Lady Margaret Ashford, Rowan's father's sister. I came to see if the rumors were true, if my nephew had truly fallen so far as to be living like a peasant in his own home." "We're surviving," Rowan said flatly. "What do you want, Aunt?" "To help, you stubborn boy." Margaret gestured at the manor. "You can't possibly manage this place alone, not with winter coming. I have staff to spare. I can send servants, a proper housekeeper, people who know what they're doing." "No." The word was flat, final. Margaret blinked, clearly not used to being refused. "Don't be ridiculous. You need help." "We need to do this ourselves." Rowan moved closer to Elena, a united front. "The servants who left. They'd been enabling my worst instincts for years, letting me rot in guilt and isolation because it was easier than actually helping. We don't need that kind of help anymore." "So you'll just what? Play at being farmers? Pretend you're not nobility?" Margaret's voice was sharp with disapproval. "We'll learn," Elena said. "We're already learning, and we're surviving just fine." "Fine?" Margaret laughed, disbelieving. "Look at this place, half of it's rubble. You're covered in dirt and clearly haven't had a proper meal in weeks." "This isn't fine. This is desperation." "This is choice." Elena's voice was steady. "Every day we stay here, every day we get better at surviving, we're choosing this life. Choosing each other. Choosing to prove wrong everyone who said we'd fail." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A social climber, a gold digger, someone who married my nephew for his title and would bleed him dry." She smiled, thin and sharp. "But you look at him like he's human, not a title. And he—" She turned to Rowan. "He looks alive for the first time in 5 years. Dirty and exhausted and half-starved, but alive." Rowan's hand found Elena's, their fingers intertwining automatically. "She saved me. Not in the way people tried before, not by fixing me or managing me, by standing beside me and refusing to let me give up." "And you saved her," Margaret said, surprising them both. "From a family that was willing to sell her, from a future with no agency. You gave each other choice. That's—" She stopped, something like emotion flickering across her face. "That's rarer than you know." She turned back to her carriage, and Elena felt hope and disappointment war in her chest. Hope that they'd proven something, disappointment that help wasn't coming, that they'd keep struggling alone.
But Margaret wasn't climbing back in. She was pulling out packages, handing them to her driver. "I'm not sending you servants," she said crisply. "You're right that you need to do this yourselves, but I'm not a complete monster. Here, practical supplies. Warm blankets, proper tools, seeds for winter vegetables, medical supplies for when one of you inevitably injures yourself being stupidly stubborn." She fixed them both with a sharp stare. "And I'll be back in a month. If you're still alive, still standing, still choosing this life, then I'll know you meant what you said." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, the first real kindness from the outside world in weeks. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. This might be the hardest thing you've ever done." Margaret climbed back into her carriage. "But if anyone can do it, it seems you two can. Stubborn, foolish, and perfectly matched." The carriage rolled away, leaving Elena and Rowan standing in the courtyard with arms full of supplies and something that felt dangerously like validation. "She didn't call us failures," Elena said wonderingly. "She called us stubborn fools." "Same thing." Elena set down her packages and threw her arms around Rowan's neck, sudden joy bubbling up. She saw us, and she didn't pity us. She saw what we're building. Rowan caught her, spinning her around despite the packages tumbling from his arms. "We're really doing this, actually surviving." "Better than surviving." Elena pulled back to look at him, this man who'd been a stranger a month ago and was now tangled up in every part of her life. "We're living. Maybe for the first time in years." He kissed her then, not in crisis, not in desperation, but in celebration, in joy, in the knowledge that they'd chosen each other and were choosing each other still, every day with every challenge they faced together. When they finally broke apart, the sun was setting over the moorland, painting everything in shades of gold. The manor stood behind them, broken but standing, damaged but not destroyed, just like them. "Come on," Elena said, picking up the packages. "Let's see what gifts your terrifying aunt brought us." They spent the evening going through Margaret's supplies like children on a holiday. Thick wool blankets that would make the coming winter bearable, seeds for hardy vegetables that could survive the harsh climate, a comprehensive medical kit, tools they'd been missing. And at the bottom, a note in Margaret's crisp handwriting: "Prove them all wrong. M." "I intend to," Elena said aloud, and Rowan pulled her close, both of them looking at the note like it was a battle standard. They'd been exiled to the edge of nowhere, abandoned by servants and mocked by villagers, left to die in a half-ruined manor with winter coming and no guarantee they'd survive. But they were still standing, still fighting, still choosing this impossible life. And for the first time since Elena had arrived at Blackmore Manor, she felt something settle in her chest that might have been hope. Not the naive hope of rescue or easy solutions, but the fierce, stubborn hope of people who'd looked at impossible odds and decided to win anyway. They were going to make it, together. Winter came early that year, sweeping across the moorland with teeth bared and claws out. Elena woke to frost coating the inside of the windows, her breath visible in the air, despite the fire Rowan had built before dawn. She burrowed deeper into the blankets, the thick wool ones Margaret had brought, and listened to him moving around downstairs, the familiar sounds of someone who'd learned to be useful with his hands. 4 months. They'd survived 4 months since the servants left, since the storm destroyed half the manor, since they'd made the insane decision to stay and fight instead of flee. Elena stretched, cataloging the aches in her body. Her hands were permanently calloused now, the soft skin of a lady replaced by the rough palms of someone who milked goats and hauled water and split wood when Rowan's injured hand couldn't manage it. Her muscles had hardened from constant physical labor. She'd lost weight initially, then gained it back in different places, stronger, more capable. She barely recognized herself in the mirror anymore, and she liked what she saw. "You awake up there?" Rowan called from below. "Unfortunately." Elena climbed out of bed, shivering as her feet hit the cold floor. "How bad is it?" "Snow's starting. We'll need to bring the goats into the barn today, or risk losing them." Elena pulled on layers, practical wool dress, thick stockings, the sturdy boots they'd bought on their monthly trip to the village. The trips had become routine now, though the villagers still treated them with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. "Still alive, then," Mrs. Finch had said last week, counting out their supplies with careful precision. "That's more than most wagered."
How much did you lose betting against us? Elena had asked, feeling bold. The old woman had actually smiled. Nothing. I bet on you stubborn fools from the start.
Downstairs, the kitchen was warm and smelled of bread. Actual good bread, not the dense bricks Elena had produced in those first desperate weeks. Rowan had turned out to be surprisingly good at baking, his careful precision translating well to following recipes. "Morning," he said, pulling her in for a kiss that tasted like coffee and contentment. This had become routine too, the casual affection, the comfort of waking up together, the way they moved around each other in the small space they'd carved out of the manor's ruins. They'd stopped pretending there was careful distance between them sometime in October, when the first real cold snap had hit, and sharing body heat had stopped being about survival and started being about choice. "Margaret's coming today," Rowan said, setting bread and butter on the table. "Her monthly inspection." "It's not an inspection. She's checking on us." "It feels like an inspection." He poured coffee, strong and dark. "What if we've done something wrong? What if she decides we're not managing properly after all?" Elena took his hand, squeezing gently. The nightmares had mostly stopped, but anxiety still crept in during quiet moments. "We've survived 4 months of winter prep, learned to manage livestock, kept ourselves fed and warm, and haven't killed each other despite living in close quarters. I think we're doing fine." "Better than fine," Rowan admitted, "but I keep waiting for it to fall apart, for something to go wrong." "Something will go wrong. Something always does. But we'll handle it." Elena sipped her coffee. "Like we handle everything else, together and probably messily but successfully in the end." He smiled at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "When did you get so optimistic?" "When I realized I was happy." The words surprised her even as she said them. Actually happy. Not pretending, not surviving day to day, just content. Is that weird? "No." Rowan pulled her closer. "It's perfect. You're perfect. I'm covered in goat hair and I smell like the barn." "Still perfect." They spent the morning doing the necessary work, feeding animals, checking on preserved food stores, making sure the manor's weatherproofing held against the increasingly hostile weather. It was hard work, often frustrating, but there was satisfaction in it that Elena had never found in her old life of enforced idleness and social performance. Margaret's carriage arrived just after noon, crunching through the fresh snow with mechanical precision. The older woman climbed out, bundled in furs, her sharp eyes immediately assessing everything. "Well," she said, looking at the manor's patched roof, the organized barn, the smoke rising steadily from the kitchen chimney. "You're still standing. That's something." "That's everything," Elena corrected, wiping her hands on her apron. "Come inside, I made tea." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly. "You made tea, not servants." "We don't have servants. We do things ourselves now." They settled in the kitchen, the warmest room and the one they'd made most livable. Margaret accepted her tea with the same assessing look she'd worn outside. "The village is talking about you," she said without preamble. "Mrs. Finch says you come in monthly for supplies, pay fair prices, and never complain. The butcher's wife saw you selling eggs last week, said they were the finest she'd had in years." "The chickens are good producers," Elena said. "We had surplus." "You're trading, running the estate like a business." Margaret sipped her tea. "That's more than Rowan's managed in years." "That's because I actually leave the manor now," Rowan said quietly. "Elena convinced me the village wouldn't eat me alive if I showed my face." "And they didn't?" "They stared, whispered. A few were openly hostile." He shrugged. "But Mrs. Finch vouched for us. Said anyone stubborn enough to survive what we'd survived deserved a chance." Margaret set down her teacup with a decisive click. "I have a proposition for you both." Elena felt tension coil in her stomach. "What kind of proposition?" "The county Christmas gathering. It's in 3 weeks. All the local gentry come together for dinner, dancing, the usual social nonsense." Margaret's gaze was sharp. "You should attend, both of you." "Absolutely not," Rowan said immediately. "I haven't attended a social event in 5 years. I'm not starting now." "Why not? Afraid they'll judge you?" "They will judge us. They'll see Elena's work-rough hands and my calluses, and the fact that we're running the estate ourselves like common laborers.
And they'll see that you're alive, Margaret interrupted. That you survived what should have destroyed you. That you built something real from absolute ruin. She leaned forward. The county thinks you're mad, Rowan.
That you drove your first wife to death, and you're in the process of destroying your second. Showing up together, clearly thriving, would put those rumors to rest.
I don't care about rumors, Rowan said.
But I do, Elena said quietly. Both of them turned to look at her. Not for me. For you. These rumors. They've been poisoning your reputation for years. People think you're a monster. Don't you want to show them they're wrong? I don't owe them anything. No. But you owe yourself the chance to step out of the shadows. Elena took his hand. We've rebuilt the manor. We've rebuilt ourselves. Maybe it's time to rebuild your place in the world too. Rowan looked torn, his jaw tight with old fears.
What if they're cruel? What if they…
Then we leave.
Together. Elena squeezed his hand. But at least we'll have tried. Margaret was watching this exchange with undisguised interest. When Rowan finally nodded, reluctant but willing, she smiled. Good, I'll send a carriage.
Well, she stood, brushing imaginary dust from her dress. And Elena, you'll need a proper gown. I'm sending my dressmaker next week. Don't argue, she added when Elena opened her mouth. You've proven you can survive in practical clothes. Now prove you can thrive in formal ones. After Margaret left, Elena found Rowan in the barn, ostensibly checking on the goats, but clearly brooding. You don't have to do this, she said, leaning against the stall door. If it's too much, it's not too much. It's terrifying. He looked at her, and there was old pain in his eyes. The last time I attended a social event, Catherine was with me. She hated them, the crowds, the noise, the forced smiling. I should have seen it was making her worse. Should have stopped dragging her to things she couldn't handle. You're not dragging me anywhere. I'm choosing this. Elena moved closer. And I'm choosing it with you. Not as some fragile thing that needs protecting, but as your partner. Your equal. Someone who can stand beside you and face whatever comes. Rowan pulled her into his arms, holding tight. When did you get so strong? I've always been strong. I just didn't have anyone worth being strong for before. The dressmaker arrived the following week with fabrics and patterns, and an efficiency that bordered on terrifying. She took one look at Elena's work-hardened body and smiled. Finally, she said, a woman with actual shape to work with instead of these waif-like creatures who faint if you pull a corset too tight. The gown she created was deep green wool, practical enough for winter but elegant in cut, highlighting Elena's stronger frame rather than trying to hide it. When Elena finally tried it on, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Still herself, but transformed, polished without being artificial. You look like a duchess, Rowan said from the doorway, his voice rough with something that might have been awe. I look like someone pretending to be a duchess. No, you look like exactly what you are. Someone who's earned the title through blood and sweat and refusing to give up. He crossed the room, taking her hands. You're magnificent. The night of the Christmas gathering arrived too quickly. Elena stood in front of the mirror, her hands shaking slightly as she fastened the clasp on the simple necklace Margaret had lent her. You're nervous, Rowan observed. Terrified. These are your people. What if I say something wrong? What if I use the wrong fork or laugh too loud or… Then you'll be human, which is more than most of them can claim. Rowan straightened his cravat. The formal clothes looked strange on him now, too confining after months of practical work clothes. Besides, we're in this together. If it gets unbearable, we leave. The gathering was being held at the estate of Lord and Lady Pemberton, a sprawling manor that made even the intact parts of Blackmore look modest by comparison. Carriages lined the drive, light spilling from every window, the sound of music and laughter carrying across the snow. Elena's stomach twisted as they climbed down from Margaret's borrowed carriage. This was a mistake. They didn't belong here. These people would take one look at her calloused hands and know she was a fraud. Breathe, Rowan murmured, his hand warm on her back. You've survived far worse than a dinner party. Have I, though? He laughed, surprised and genuine, and some of Elena's panic eased. They could do this. They'd survived everything else. What was one night of social performance?
The ballroom was overwhelming, crystal chandeliers, elaborate decorations, dozens of elegantly dressed people who all turned to stare as they entered. Elena felt their gazes like physical weight, cataloging and judging.
"That's Rowan Blackmore," someone whispered, not quite quietly enough. "I heard he went completely mad, fired all his servants and lives like a hermit. And that must be the new wife, poor thing. Give her a year before she ends up like the first one." Elena's spine straightened, old defiance kindling. Poor thing. They thought she was a victim, thought Rowan was destroying her. She was about to prove them spectacularly wrong. "Lord Blackmore," their host boomed, approaching with the forced enthusiasm of someone doing their social duty. "What a surprise to see you, and this must be your lovely wife." "Elena Blackmore," she said, offering her hand with more confidence than she felt. "Thank you for having us." Lady Pemberton materialized beside her husband, all false smiles and assessing eyes. "How wonderful that you could attend. We were so worried when we heard about your difficulties. No servants must be terribly challenging." "We're managing," Elena said evenly. "Of course, though I can't imagine running an estate without proper help. However do you cope?" The question was laced with condescension, the assumption that Elena was suffering nobly through impossible circumstances. But before Elena could respond, a familiar voice cut in. "They cope by being competent," Margaret said crisply, appearing at Elena's elbow like a perfectly timed rescue. "Unlike some people who'd collapse without a dozen servants to manage their every need." Lady Pemberton's smile went brittle. "Margaret, how direct of you." "It's one of my charms." Margaret steered Elena toward a group of women, leaving Rowan to navigate the men's conversation. "Don't let these vultures smell weakness. They'll tear you apart." The next hour was a masterclass in social warfare. Elena fielded intrusive questions about the manor's collapse, about the servant's departure, about her marriage. Each query was designed to expose weakness, to confirm the rumors of dysfunction and tragedy. But Elena had spent months learning to survive hostile environments. A dinner party was nothing compared to rebuilding a manor from scratch. "Is it true you milk your own goats?" one woman asked, her tone suggesting this was tantamount to admitting peasantry. "It is," Elena said cheerfully. "They're temperamental creatures, but excellent producers. We've been selling the surplus in the village. Mrs. Finch says our butter is the finest she's stocked in years." "You sell your own goods?" The woman looked scandalized. "Why wouldn't I? The estate produces excellent products. It seems wasteful not to capitalize on that." Elena sipped her wine. "In fact, we're considering expanding our poultry operation in spring. There's significant demand for quality eggs." She could see the calculation in the woman's eyes, trying to decide if Elena was admirably practical or hopelessly common. Before a verdict could be reached, another woman interjected. "But surely you miss having proper help. Running a household yourself must be exhausting." "It's work," Elena agreed, "but satisfying work. There's something deeply rewarding about building something with your own hands rather than simply directing others to do it for you." "How quaint." Margaret caught Elena's eye across the room and gave a small nod of approval. Elena was holding her own, neither apologizing for their circumstances nor pretending they were anything other than what they were. Dinner was announced, and Elena found herself seated between a pompous lord who ignored her completely and a younger woman who seemed genuinely curious. "Is it true you stayed when all the servants left?" the young woman asked quietly. "It is." "That must have been terrifying." "It was, but also liberating." Elena considered her words carefully. "For the first time in my life, I wasn't being managed or directed or told what I should be. I was simply surviving, making my own choices. It's amazing how freeing that can be." The young woman's expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, or longing. "I can't imagine having that kind of freedom." "Why not?" "I'm engaged to be married. To a man I've never met, arranged by my father to settle some business dispute." She looked down at her plate. "I'm terrified I'll end up like—" She stopped, flushing. "Like Catherine Blackmore," Elena finished gently. "The first Duchess who went mad and died?" The girl nodded, miserable. "Can I tell you what actually happened to Catherine?" Elena kept her voice low. "She was deeply unhappy. Not because Rowan was cruel or neglectful, but because she was suffering from something neither of them understood. Depression, melancholy, whatever name you give it, it was an illness. And instead of getting help, she isolated herself until there was nothing left.
"That's what everyone says will happen to you," the girl whispered. "That Lord Blackmore drove his first wife mad, and he'll do the same to you." Rowan didn't drive anyone mad. He's a good man who was dealt impossible circumstances and did the best he could. Elena met the girl's eyes directly. "And I'm not Catherine. I'm not fragile or delicate. I'm stubborn and practical, and I refuse to let circumstances or other people's expectations define my life. That's the difference." "But you're still trapped, married to him, living in that ruined manor." "I'm not trapped. I'm choosing this life, every day. That's power, not imprisonment." Elena softened her voice. "Your engagement, do you have any choice in it?" "No. My father's already signed the contracts." "Then make the choice to survive it, to build something meaningful from whatever circumstances you're given. Don't let fear or other people's expectations turn you into a ghost." Elena squeezed the girl's hand. "Scott,
You're stronger than you know. Trust me on that." The girl's eyes were damp. "Thank you." After dinner, there was dancing. Elena watched Rowan navigate the social circles with growing confidence, saw him deflect invasive questions with dry humor, saw him slowly relax into something approaching comfort. When he finally found her, pulling her onto the dance floor, his smile was genuine. "You're enjoying this," Elena accused. "I'm tolerating it. There's a difference." He spun her expertly. They'd practiced in the manor's empty ballroom, laughing through missed steps and collisions. "But watching you eviscerate these pompous fools with polite conversation, that I'm enjoying." "I haven't eviscerated anyone." "Lady Pemberton looked like she'd swallowed glass when you explained our livestock business. Lord Ashford nearly choked when you mentioned manual labor." Rowan's eyes were bright with mischief. "You're scandalizing them just by existing successfully." "Good. They deserve to be scandalized." "They deserve worse, but I'll settle for proving them wrong." He pulled her closer, ignoring the proper distance that should have been maintained. "We did it, Elena. We survived long enough to shove their pity and condescension back in their faces. We did more than survive. We thrived." The music swelled, and Elena let herself sink into the moment, the warmth of Rowan's hand on her waist, the bright lights and music, the knowledge that they'd earned their place here not through birthright or social performance, but through sheer, stubborn survival. As the evening wound down, Margaret found them near the refreshments. "Well," she said, her tone crisp but approving, "that was quite the performance." "It wasn't a performance," Rowan said. "It was just us, being honest about our lives." "Which is the most subversive thing you could have done." Margaret's smile was sharp. "Half the room is scandalized, the other half is intrigued. By morning, the whole county will be talking about the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore, who run their own estate and seem disgustingly happy about it." "Disgustingly?" Elena laughed. "You're setting a terrible precedent. If nobles start doing their own work, what use are the rest of us?" But Margaret's eyes were warm. "I'm proud of you both. You took the worst situation imaginable and built something real from it." They left shortly after, bundled back into Margaret's carriage for the ride home. Snow was falling steadily now, coating everything in white. "That wasn't as terrible as I expected," Rowan admitted. "It was enlightening." Elena settled against his shoulder. "I spent so long thinking these people had power over us. But they don't. Not really. We have something they'll never understand, actual competence, the ability to survive without servants and social approval." "You've gotten very philosophical." "I've had a lot of time to think while milking goats." He laughed, pulling her closer. "I love you." The words hung in the air, sudden and raw. Elena pulled back to look at him, searching his face. "You don't have to say that just because—" "I'm not saying it because of anything except it's true." Rowan's voice was steady. "I love you. I love your stubbornness and your strength and the way you refuse to give up even when everything's falling apart. I love that you chose to stay when anyone sane would have run. I love—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I love you. And I needed you to know that." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. happy tears, which still felt strange and new. I love you too. Even though you're terrible at splitting wood, and you burned the bread more times than I did, and you still have nightmares sometimes that wake us both up. Even though? Because of. All of it. The broken parts and the strong parts and everything in between. She kissed him, soft and certain. We built this together, not just the estate, us, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. The carriage rolled through the gates of Blackmore Manor, and Elena looked at their home with new eyes. Yes, half of it was still rubble. Yes, it was drafty and difficult and required constant maintenance, but it was theirs. Built by their hands, sustained by their choices, transformed from a tomb into something living. That winter was the hardest yet, with storms that buried them in snow for days at a time. But they'd prepared well. The root cellar was full of preserved vegetables. The barn housed healthy livestock. The manor's intact sections were warm and weatherproof. They spent long evenings by the fire, reading or planning or simply existing together in comfortable silence. Rowan's nightmares came less frequently, and when they did, Elena was there to anchor him back to the present. Her own demons, the fear of being unwanted, of being nothing more than a commodity to be sold, had quieted in the face of being genuinely chosen, genuinely valued. Spring came eventually, as it always did. The snow melted, revealing the manor's bones beneath. And with the thaw came visitors. Mrs. Finch from the village, ostensibly checking if they'd survived the winter, but really just curious about the couple who'd become local legends. The young woman from the Christmas party, asking Elena's advice on surviving an arranged marriage with dignity and tact. Even a few of the servants who'd left, sheepish and humbled, asking if positions might be available. No, Rowan told Graves when the former butler appeared at their door. You made your choice. We've made ours. Your Grace, I was wrong. We all were. You're clearly thriving. We're thriving because we learned to rely on ourselves and each other, not on people who'd enable our worst tendencies for their own convenience. Rowan's voice was firm but not cruel. You're not welcome here anymore. Find employment elsewhere. After he left, Elena wrapped her arms around Rowan's waist from behind. That must have felt good. It felt necessary. We can't go backward, only forward. By summer, they'd hired 2 new servants, young people from the village who were willing to learn and who understood that the Blackmores ran their estate differently than other nobles. They were partners in the work, not masters directing from a distance. The estate flourished under this approach. Their eggs and butter became sought after in the village and beyond. They started breeding the goats, selling offspring to other farms. The manor's gardens, long neglected, burst into productivity under Elena's determined care. And through it all, Elena and Rowan worked side by side, equal partners in every sense, building something that was entirely theirs. One evening, as they sat on the manor's rebuilt terrace watching the sunset paint the moorland gold, Rowan took Elena's hand. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Staying. Choosing this life. Elena thought about that, about the soft hands and idle life she'd left behind, about the woman she'd been, passive, managed, defined by other people's expectations. Never, she said. This life is hard, but it's mine, ours. We earned it. We did. Rowan pulled her closer. I was barely alive before you came, just existing in the ruins of my past. You taught me how to live again. You taught me how to fight, how to refuse to accept what other people decided I deserved. Elena looked at the manor, at the land stretching endlessly around them, at the life they'd built from absolute ruin. We saved each other. Years later, when people asked about the Duke and Duchess of Blackmore, the stories they told were almost mythical. The couple who'd survived total isolation and rebuilt their estate from rubble. The nobles who worked alongside their servants and turned a failing manor into a thriving enterprise. The love story that began in exile and became a legend. But the truth was simpler and more beautiful than any myth. 2 people, broken by their pasts, had found each other in the wreckage, had chosen survival over surrender, had built something real and lasting from circumstances that should have destroyed them. Elena stood in the manor's kitchen, expanded now, modernized, the heart of their home, watching Rowan teach their young daughter how to milk the goats. The child was laughing, delighted by the temperamental animals, fearless in a way that came from being raised by parents who'd faced down worse than cranky livestock. "Mama, did you really used to live in the servants' quarters?" the girl called. "I did. Your father put me there because he was an idiot." "I was grieving," Rowan protested, "and terrified, and yes, also an idiot." Their daughter giggled, and the sound filled the yard with joy. This was what they'd built. Not just a functional estate or a successful business, but a home, a family, a life defined by choice rather than circumstance. Elena moved to join them, her hand finding Rowan's automatically. He smiled at her, that same smile that had transformed from broken to whole over years of choosing each other daily. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For staying, for fighting, for refusing to let me give up." He kissed her temple. "For everything." Elena looked around at their life. Messy, complicated, built from determination and stubborn love. The manor stood behind them, no longer a tomb, but a testament. The moorland stretched endlessly, no longer hostile but home. "Thank you for being worth staying for," she said. And in that moment, standing in the yard of the manor that had tried to break them, surrounded by the life they'd built together, Elena felt something she'd never expected to feel when she'd first arrived at Blackmore Manor all those years ago. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because she'd found someone who made imperfection beautiful. Someone who valued her strength rather than trying to diminish it. Someone who stood beside her in the face of impossible odds and chose to fight. The frontier had tested them, the isolation had challenged them, the manor had haunted them, but they'd conquered all of it, together. And that made all the difference.